By the time the boots hit the sand, the war had already decided it would not end quickly. The Western Front of 1944 to 1945 was not a single campaign, a single landing, or a single victory. It was a long collapse measured in miles, seasons, and lives. A grinding advance where momentum surged, stalled, froze, and surged again. What began on the beaches of Normandy would end deep inside Germany, not with one decisive blow, but with the steady unraveling of an entire military system. This was a front defined by movement and resistance. In the summer of 1944, Allied forces returned to Western Europe with overwhelming power and unfinished business. The invasion of France opened a front that Germany could no longer afford to hold, yet could not abandon. What followed was not immediate victory, but months of brutal fighting shaped by terrain, weather, logistics, and the enemy's refusal to collapse on schedule. Normandy was not a breakout. It was containment. Hedgerows swallowed visibility. Every field became a strong point. Every village had to be taken the hard way. Progress came slowly, paid for yard by yard. Only when the front finally broke did the war seem to change shape, transforming into a pursuit across France where speed returned and the enemy reeled. But momentum does not last forever. Supply lines stretched thin, fuel vanished, the front widened faster than it could be fed. By autumn, the Western Front slowed again, pressed against rivers, fortified lines, and cities reduced to rubble. The enemy was wounded, but not finished, and winter was coming. In the Ardennes, the front shattered once more. The German counteroffensive struck through fog and forest, tearing open Allied lines and forcing the war back into uncertainty. Roads froze. Units were surrounded. Battles were fought not just for ground, but for survival. The Western Front became a place where time mattered more than territory, where holding a crossroads or delaying an advance could decide the fate of entire armies. When the counteroffensive failed, the war entered its final phase. The Rhine stood ahead, wide, cold, and heavily defended. Beyond it lay the heart of Germany. Crossing it meant committing fully to the end, knowing the cost would rise even as victory approached. Cities fell one by one. Resistance stiffened, then broke. The front rolled forward through ruins that no longer resembled victory. By the spring of 1945, the Western Front was no longer a line. It was a wave. Armies advanced through shattered infrastructure, liberated camps, and civilian populations caught between collapse and survival. The enemy fought on in fragments, sometimes fanatically, sometimes simply because stopping felt impossible. When it ended, it did not feel triumphant. It felt heavy. The Western Front of 1944 to 1945 mattered because it shows how wars actually conclude, not with clean finales, but with exhaustion, destruction, and the slow realization that nothing will ever return to what it was before. It was a front of adaptation, of endurance, of decisions made under pressure that shaped the post-war world as much as the battlefield itself. Tonight, we return to that final march across Western Europe, from the beaches to the rivers, as from momentum to stalemate to collapse, from invasion to occupation. This is the history of the Western Front, the last great campaign in the West, where the Second World War finally ran out of ground to destroy. And before we continue, I want to speak to you directly. If you're listening right now, take a moment and tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from? And what time is it for you? Is this a late night listen, an early morning start, or a quiet pause at the end of a long day? And if these long, immersive journeys into history help you slow down, reflect, or make sense of the past without rushing it, I hope you'll consider subscribing. If this feels like a place you'd like to return to, then stay with me. Settle in. This is the history of the Western Front, 1944 to 1945. June 5th, 1944, 4:15 in the morning. General Dwight Eisenhower sits alone in a drafty office at Southwick House, Portsmouth, England. Rain hammers against the windows. In his hand, a folded piece of paper. On it, words he has just written in pencil, accepting full responsibility for what might become the greatest military disaster in American history. He folds it carefully and places it in his wallet, where it will remain throughout the day. Outside, 156,000 men are preparing to cross the English Channel into what could be either history's most successful amphibious invasion or an unthinkable catastrophe. The weather is terrible. The Germans are waiting. And Eisenhower has just made the decision that will define the 20th century. Across the Channel, in a chateau in France, the Field Marshal Erwin Rommel sleeps peacefully. The Desert Fox, Germany's most celebrated commander, has concluded that the weather makes an Allied invasion impossible for at least 2 weeks. Tomorrow is his wife's birthday. He has asked permission to return to Germany for the celebration, and Hitler has granted it. In a few hours, Rommel will climb into his staff car and begin the long drive away from the French coast. He will be absent when the invasion he has spent months preparing to defeat finally arrives. The greatest defensive mind in the German military will be buying birthday presents while Allied troops wait ashore. History turns on such absurdities. But Rommel's absence is not an accident of fate. It is the result of the most elaborate deception in military history. For 18 months, the Allied intelligence has been feeding Germany false information through captured spies, fake radio traffic, and phantom armies that exist only on paper and in German imagination. Operation Fortitude has convinced Hitler and his high command that the real invasion will come at Pas de Calais, 150 miles northeast of Normandy. 19 entire German divisions, including some of Germany's best armored units, sit waiting at Pas de Calais for an invasion that will never come. Even more remarkably, they will remain there for weeks after D-Day, convinced that Normandy is merely a feint. The Phantom 1st United States Army Group, supposedly commanded by George Patton, consists of inflatable rubber tanks, wooden artillery pieces, and a small team of radio operators broadcasting endless fake messages. Then when the Germans believe this imaginary army of 1 million men will deliver the real blow at Calais, the deception extends to details so minute they border on absurdity. Allied intelligence has created fake shoulder patches for imaginary divisions. They have arranged for laundry services near Patton's headquarters to generate the appropriate volume of dirty uniforms. They have staged wedding announcements in local newspapers for officers and units that do not exist. German reconnaissance aircraft photograph massive concentrations of landing craft in harbors opposite Calais, never realizing they are looking at plywood and canvas. Every piece of false information reinforces the others, creating a web of lies so intricate that even when truth begins to emerge, German commanders cannot separate reality from deception. On the evening of June 5th, as real invasion forces gather off the Normandy coast, German intelligence officers are congratulating themselves on their successful identification of the Allied strategy. They are completely, catastrophically wrong. At Pas de Calais, 11:45 at night, the German 15th Army receives an alert. Allied radio traffic has suddenly increased. Something is happening. Commander Hans von Salmuth orders his troops to full readiness. Searchlights probe the darkness over the channel. Coastal artillery crews man their guns. Everyone is certain the invasion is finally coming to Calais. They are right that an invasion is coming. They are wrong about where. 150 miles to the southwest, the first Allied aircraft are crossing the French coast at Normandy. Pathfinder teams jump into the darkness and marking drop zones for the main airborne assault. They land in hedgerows and flooded fields, often miles from their intended positions. Many drown in marshes that German engineers have deliberately flooded. Others are captured within minutes of landing, but enough survive to begin marking zones with colored lights and radio beacons. The invasion has begun, and most of the German defenders are still asleep. The weather that Eisenhower feared might doom the invasion instead becomes an advantage. German commanders have seen the same weather reports. They have concluded, just as Rommel did, that invasion is impossible. Coastal units are at reduced readiness. Some officers have gone to Rhine for a training exercise. Others have taken leave. When the first reports of parachute landings begin arriving shortly after midnight, a German command dismisses them as small-scale raids. Even when reports multiply, showing Allied troops landing across a 50-mile front, headquarters remains convinced this cannot be the main invasion. They wait for the real attack at Calais. At 1:30 in the morning, when German command finally realizes this might be more than a raid, they face a problem. Only Hitler can authorize the release of panzer reserves. Hitler is asleep at the Berghof, his mountain retreat. His staff knows better than to wake him. Hours pass. The panzers sit idle. At 10 o'clock in the morning, Hitler finally wakes. He is briefed on the Normandy landings. He remains convinced this is a diversion. The real invasion, he insists, will come at Calais. He refuses to release the panzer reserves. His generals plead. Ultra, the Allied code-breaking operation, all intercepts these increasingly desperate requests. British intelligence officers at Bletchley Park read Hitler's refusal to commit armor before German field commanders receive the news. The Allies have penetrated German communications so thoroughly that they sometimes know German orders before those orders reach the intended recipients. This advantage, which will prove decisive throughout the campaign, begins paying dividends immediately. Allied commanders know they have hours to establish their beachheads before German armor can respond. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Hitler finally authorizes limited panzer movements. But limited is the operative word. He still believes Calais is the main target. He releases only enough forces to contain what he considers a secondary landing. The 21st Panzer Division begins moving toward the coast. Panzer Lehr Division receives orders to advance but is delayed by command confusion and fuel shortages. The window for a devastating counterattack is closing. If German armor had hit the beaches in the first hours, when Allied troops were most vulnerable and disorganized, they might have driven the invasion back into the sea. Instead, panzers will arrive piecemeal, too late to prevent the Allies from establishing a foothold, too weak to throw them back once established. The decisive battle will be lost before most German commanders realize it has begun. In Normandy, American and British troops are coming ashore on 5 beaches. Some landings go smoothly. At Utah Beach, American forces encounter light resistance and push inland with few casualties. At Gold and Juno beaches, bold British and Canadian troops overcome initial opposition and begin advancing. At Sword Beach, British forces land successfully, but face stiffening resistance as they push toward the city of Caen. And then, there is Omaha Beach. At Omaha, everything that can go wrong does go wrong. Bombers miss their targets. Naval bombardment proves insufficient. The current pushes landing craft off course. And waiting on the bluffs above the beach is the German 352nd Infantry Division, supposedly positioned there only for training exercises. Through sheer brutal coincidence, the Allies have chosen to land directly against one of the strongest defensive positions in Normandy, defended by twice as many troops as intelligence predicted. As night falls on June 5th, the outcome remains uncertain. Allied forces are ashore, but their foothold is precarious. At Omaha, thousands of men are pinned down on the beach, taking horrific casualties. Elsewhere, paratroopers are scattered across the countryside, many lost or captured. German reinforcements are beginning to arrive, though in nothing like the strength that might have stopped the invasion in its first hours. The Great Deception has worked almost too well. German commanders remain convinced for days that Normandy is a feint, that Patton's Phantom Army will deliver the real blow at Calais. This conviction, born from 18 months of meticulous Allied lies, will cost Germany the war in the West. As soldiers on both sides prepare for the battles ahead, they cannot know that the decisive moment has already passed. The invasion will succeed not because of what happens on June 6th, but because of what failed to happen on June 5th, when German panzers sat idle while Hitler slept. June 6th, 1944, 6:30 in the morning. Sector Dog Green, Omaha Beach. Company A of the 116th Infantry Regiment splashes into the surf. Within 10 minutes, 96% of these men will be casualties. The beach is not supposed to look like this. According to the plan, bombers should have destroyed the German fortifications. Naval gunfire should have suppressed the defenders. Specialized tanks should have cleared obstacles and provided covering fire. None of this has happened. The bombers, flying through cloud cover and fearing they might hit the landing craft, delayed their bomb release by seconds. Those seconds translated into miles. Every bomb fell harmlessly inland, but cratering empty fields while the German bunkers remained untouched. The naval bombardment, though impressive in scale, proved too brief and too imprecise to destroy fortified positions. And the specialized D.D. Sherman tanks, designed to swim ashore and provide immediate fire support, have mostly sunk. The DD tanks represent one of the war's more desperate innovations. Someone had the idea of attaching inflatable canvas skirts to Sherman tanks, creating buoyancy that would theoretically allow them to float. In calm water, in controlled conditions, this sometimes worked. In the choppy seas off Omaha Beach, it becomes mass drowning. 27 tanks are launched 3 miles offshore. 27 crews climb into their vehicles and drive off the landing craft ramps into the water. The canvas skirts are supposed to keep the 30-ton vehicles afloat. 25 tanks sink almost immediately, taking most of their crews with them. The men inside have no chance. The tanks plunge to the bottom. Some crews manage to escape the flooding hulls. Others do not. Bodies will remain trapped in these tanks until they are eventually salvaged months later. The 2 tanks that somehow make it ashore arrive to find themselves alone, facing an entire German infantry division without infantry support. On the beach, the scene exceeds any nightmare the planners imagined. Men wade through water, turned red with blood. Bodies float in the surf. The wounded drown because they cannot crawl above the tide line. Machine gun fire from the bluffs above creates a murderous crossfire. Every German bunker that was supposed to be destroyed is intact and firing. Every German defender who was supposed to be dead or demoralized is alert and determined. The men of Company A are caught in the open with nowhere to hide. Some try to take cover behind beach obstacles. German artillery has ranged these obstacles precisely. Shells burst among the huddled men. Others try to run for the seawall. The distance from the water's edge to the wall is 300 yards of open sand. Men who begin this run rarely complete it. Within the first hour, Omaha Beach has produced more American casualties than the other 4 landing beaches combined. The slaughter continues through the morning. At 8:30, Colonel George Taylor of the 16th Infantry Regiment reaches the beach. He sees men paralyzed with fear, pinned down by fire, all unable to advance or retreat. He shouts what will become one of the most famous orders of the war. 2 kinds of people are staying on this beach, he tells them. Those who are dead and those who are going to die. Now, let us get the hell out of here. It is not an inspiring speech in the traditional sense. It offers no hope, no promise of victory, no appeal to higher purpose. It is simply mathematics. Stay here and die slowly or move forward and maybe die quickly, but with a chance of survival. Men begin moving, not in organized waves or tactical formations, but in small, desperate groups, scrambling over obstacles, running through gaps in the wire, climbing the bluffs wherever they can find a path. What saves Omaha Beach is not planned tactics or overwhelming force. It is Navy destroyers committing what their captains know might be court-martial offenses. The fire support plan called for destroyers to remain at least 3 miles offshore, safely beyond German artillery range. But from 3 miles, their guns cannot effectively engage the bunkers. Several destroyer captains make a decision. They ignore their orders and bring their ships to within 800 yards of the beach, so close they can see individual German soldiers in the bunkers. At this range, German shore batteries could destroy them with a single hit. But at this range, their 5-inch guns can blast bunkers with direct fire. For 90 minutes, destroyers like the U.S. S. McCook and USS Carmick pour shells into German positions. The McCook alone fires 975 rounds. The Carmick fires nearly as many. They are so close that spent shell casings from the bunkers splash into the water near the ships. The naval gunfire creates gaps in the German defenses. Small groups of American infantry exploit these gaps. There is no coordination, no grand strategy. Sergeants and lieutenants lead whoever will follow them, up draws and ravines between fortified positions. Engineers blow gaps in the wire. Bangalore torpedoes clear paths through minefields. By noon, Americans are reaching the top of the bluffs. The German defenders, who have held every advantage all morning, suddenly find American troops behind them. Bunkers that could not be taken from the front are attacked from the rear. The psychology of defense shifts. German soldiers who felt invincible while firing down on the beach now feel surrounded. Some surrender, others retreat. The momentum, at so decisively with the Germans all morning, begins to shift. By nightfall, 34,000 American troops are ashore at Omaha Beach. The cost has been 2,400 casualties, 10 times the rate at Utah Beach, where everything went according to plan. But they are ashore. The beachhead, though smaller than hoped, is secure. Ships are unloading supplies. Reinforcements are coming in on subsequent waves. The battle for Omaha was nearly lost a dozen times during the day. If one more German battalion had been positioned nearby, if the naval captains had followed their orders and stayed at safe range, if a few more sergeants had lacked the courage to lead men up those bluffs, the landing might have failed. Instead, through a combination of desperate courage, improvised tactics, and a few captains willing to risk their ships, the Allies have secured their foothold. The men who survived will never forget what they saw. Many will never speak of it. The beach they crossed that morning will be remembered as the longest, bloodiest day of the war. 10 miles to the west, at Pointe du Hoc, another drama unfolds. The point is a 100-foot cliff jutting into the channel. Intelligence has identified it as the position of 6 155mm guns that could fire on both Omaha and Utah beaches. 225 Army Rangers are assigned to scale the cliff under fire and destroy the guns. They launch from their landing craft at 7:10 in the morning. German defenders watch them come. Machine guns and grenades rain down. The Rangers fire rocket-launched grappling hooks. Some hooks fail to reach the top. Others hold. Men begin climbing rope ladders while Germans cut the ropes and shoot at anyone within range. It takes 30 minutes to get the first men to the top. They clear German positions with grenades and small arms fire. By 8 o'clock, Rangers hold the point. They search for the guns. The guns are not there. The emplacements are empty. Intelligence was wrong, or the Germans moved the guns. The Rangers have taken 135 casualties capturing a position that turns out to be irrelevant. They will hold the point for 2 days against counterattacks, isolated and running out of ammunition before relief finally arrives. War is full of such absurdities. Men die heroically for objectives that do not matter. Others survive by accident. Omaha Beach teaches both lessons simultaneously. The contrast between beaches illustrates the razor's edge on which the invasion balanced. At Utah Beach, everything worked. Bombers hit their targets. Naval gunfire was accurate. The current pushed landing craft south of the planned landing zone, which accidentally placed them opposite weaker defenses. Casualties were 197 men. At Omaha, everything failed, yet Omaha's success mattered more because it was more difficult. Utah Beach proved that the plan could work. Omaha proved that American soldiers could succeed even when the plan failed catastrophically. This distinction will prove important in the weeks ahead, when little goes according to plan, and success depends on junior officers and sergeants making decisions that doctrine never anticipated. The men who cross the beach carry 2 lessons forward. Plans are worthless when they meet reality, and determined infantry can overcome almost any obstacle if they keep moving forward. As night falls on June 6th, Allied commanders assess the situation. They are ashore on all 5 beaches. Total casualties are about 10,000, fewer than some pessimistic estimates had predicted. But they are also far behind schedule. Caen, which was supposed to fall on D-Day, remains in German hands. The beachheads are not yet linked. German resistance is stiffening, and somewhere inland, the panzer divisions that have been held in reserve all day are finally beginning to move. The longest day is over. The longest battle is about to begin. Every soldier who survives Omaha Beach now faces a question. If getting ashore was this hard, what will the rest of France be like? The answer will prove worse than most of them imagine, but that knowledge lies ahead. For tonight, they have done what seemed impossible 12 hours ago. They have breached Hitler's Atlantic Wall. Everything else will follow from that achievement. June 6th, 1944. 10 o'clock in the morning. The Berghof, Bavaria. Adolf Hitler is asleep. Outside his bedroom, staff officers gather nervously, discussing whether anyone should wake him. Reports from France indicate large-scale Allied landings across Normandy. Paratroopers are dropping behind the beaches. Naval bombardment is devastating coastal positions. But the officers remember what happened to the last person who woke Hitler with bad news. They wait. Hitler's sleep is sacred. In 1944, the Führer's schedule has become increasingly detached from reality. He often stays up until 3 or 4 in the morning, discussing architectural plans or watching movies. He then sleeps until early afternoon. His staff has learned to work around these hours, delaying important decisions until Hitler is available. This morning, as American troops struggle across Omaha Beach, as British forces push inland from Gold and Sword, Hitler sleeps undisturbed. The fate of the German defense of France depends on decisions only he can authorize. Those decisions wait while he dreams. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Hitler finally wakes. He is briefed on the Normandy situation. His response stuns his generals. This is the diversion, he insists. The real invasion will come at Pas de Calais. He has been expecting this. Operation Fortitude has worked so perfectly that even now, with Allied troops clearly establishing major beachheads in Normandy, Hitler remains convinced this is a feint. He forbids the release of panzer reserves from Calais. His generals argue, the evidence is overwhelming. This is not a raid or a diversion. This is the invasion. Hitler will not be moved. He has Enigma decrypts, carefully fed to him by the Allies through double agents, indicating the main blow will fall at Calais. He has intelligence reports showing Patton's 1st United States Army Group massing in southeastern England, directly opposite Calais. He has aerial reconnaissance photographs of vast landing craft concentrations in the channel ports nearest to Calais. All of this is false. All of it confirms what he wants to believe. While Hitler debates with his generals, the German forces in Normandy fight without the support they desperately need. The 21st Panzer Division, positioned near Caen, begins a counterattack against British forces on its own initiative. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, German tanks reach within sight of Sword Beach. If they had infantry support, if they had artillery support, if they had air cover, they might split the British beachhead in two. But they have none of these things. The division commander sees British gliders landing reinforcements to his north. He fears encirclement. Without orders from higher command, uncertain of the larger situation, he orders retreat. The 1 Panzer Division close enough to strike on D-Day pulls back from the edge of victory. The moment passes. It will not come again. Panzer Layer Division, one of Germany's elite armored units, receives orders to move toward Normandy at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The division is stationed 90 miles from the coast, near Chartres. In peacetime, this would be a 3-hour drive. In June 1944, with Allied fighter bombers controlling the skies, it becomes a nightmare. The division commander requests permission to move at night, when aircraft cannot easily spot vehicles. Permission is denied. Higher command wants the division in position immediately. Panzer Layer begins its approach march in daylight. Allied pilots spot the column almost immediately. Typhoons, Thunderbolts, Mustangs take turns strafing and bombing the road. The division spreads out, trying to minimize casualties. This slows their advance further. By the time darkness falls, Panzer Layer has lost 5 tanks, 84 half-tracks, and 130 trucks without firing a shot at the enemy. The division will not reach Normandy in strength until June 8th, 2 days too late to influence the beachhead battle. The German response to D-Day reveals a command structure paralyzed by conflicting authorities and ideological rigidity. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt commands German forces in the west, but he cannot release strategic reserves without Hitler's approval. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel commands Army Group B in northern France, but he has gone to Germany for his wife's birthday. General Friedrich Dollmann commands 7th Army in Normandy, but many of his best divisions are held under Hitler's direct control. When crisis comes, no single commander has authority to make decisive moves. Phone calls go up the chain of command, orders slowly filter back down. Hours turn into days. Meanwhile, Allied forces dig in, bring up reinforcements, and prepare for the German counterattack that seems to be coming, but never quite arrives with enough force to matter. The command confusion extends beyond just the top levels. SS Panzer divisions answer to different authority than Wehrmacht divisions. Luftwaffe field divisions take orders from the Air Force. Some units are designated Führer reserves and cannot be moved without Hitler's personal authorization. This creates a patchwork of units, some mobile, some frozen in place, unable to coordinate effectively. When the 12th SS Panzer Division finally receives orders to attack on June 7th, it does so without infantry support, because the infantry divisions are controlled by a different command, and their orders have not arrived. The attack fails. and German soldiers begin learning the lesson that will doom them in Normandy. Against Allied air superiority and naval gunfire, tactical excellence matters less than operational paralysis prevents it from mattering. Ultra-intercepts allow Allied commanders to watch this German confusion in real time. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park decrypt German communications faster than the German command system can act on its own orders. Eisenhower and Montgomery sometimes know about German troop movements before those movements begin. This advantage creates a feedback loop. The more the Germans delay and deliberate, the more time the Allies have to prepare. The more they prepare, the harder they become to dislodge. By June 10th, when Hitler finally accepts that Normandy is the real invasion and begins releasing panzer reserves from Calais, the Allies have 226,000 troops ashore. The window for pushing them back into the sea is closed. The battle has shifted from whether the Allies can stay to how fast they can expand. But if the strategic situation favors the Allies, the tactical situation proves far more difficult than expected. German troops may be poorly coordinated at the operational level, but in small unit combat, they demonstrate the professionalism that makes them such dangerous opponents. Machine gun teams position themselves with perfect fields of fire. Mortars drop rounds with uncanny accuracy. Snipers pick off officers and NCOs with methodical patience. Every hedgerow becomes a defensive position. Every stone farmhouse becomes a bunker. The weather that helped conceal the invasion now helps the defenders. While low clouds ground Allied aircraft. The bocage countryside of Normandy, with its thousand-year-old hedgerows and sunken lanes, favors defense. German soldiers, even scraped together units from second-rate divisions, make the Allies pay for every field. The Waffen-SS divisions earn particular notoriety. The 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitler Youth Division, consists largely of fanatical teenagers who have known nothing but Nazi indoctrination their entire lives. They fight with reckless courage and commit atrocities with equal enthusiasm. On June 7th, soldiers from the division execute 20 Canadian prisoners at Ardennes Abbey. Over the following weeks, the division will be implicated in the murder of 156 Allied prisoners. These are not aberrations or the actions of rogue soldiers. They are policy. ASS officers openly order their men to take no prisoners. The Allies respond in kind. Quarter is rarely offered and rarely requested. The battle in Normandy becomes increasingly brutal as both sides harden. By mid-June, the strategic situation is clear. The Allies are ashore in strength and will not be dislodged, but the tactical situation is stalemated. American, British, and Canadian forces hold a beachhead 50 miles wide and 10 miles deep. German forces, though late to arrive and poorly coordinated, have created a defensive line that stalls every Allied advance. Caen, which should have fallen on June 6th, remains in German hands. The bocage country west of the beachhead proves almost impassable. Both sides begin digging in. What was supposed to be a mobile campaign of breakthrough and exploitation begins to look disturbingly like the trench warfare of World War I. The Germans have lost the chance to throw the Allies back into the sea, but the Allies have not yet found a way to break out of their coastal enclave. The battle for Normandy is about to become a grinding, attritional struggle that no one planned and no one wants. The longest day has become the longest campaign. June 12th, 1944, near Saint-Lô, Normandy. Sergeant Curtis Cullen watches a Sherman tank try to climb a hedgerow. The tank tilts upward at a 45-degree angle, exposing its thin belly armor. A Panzerfaust round strikes the underside. The tank explodes. 3 men escape. 2 do not. This scene has repeated itself dozens of times in the past week. The Norman bocage, which barely appeared in pre-invasion planning, has become the dominant fact of the campaign. Allied planners looked at aerial photographs and saw hedgerows. They assumed these were decorative boundaries between fields, perhaps 3 or 4 feet high. They were catastrophically wrong. Norman hedgerows are 1,000-year-old earthen banks topped with thick vegetation. They average 6 feet high and 15 feet thick at the base. They have grown so dense that tanks cannot penetrate them, and infantry cannot see through them. Every field is a separate battlefield. Every farm is a fortress. Cullen, a sergeant in the 2nd Armored Division, has an idea. He has seen the German beach obstacles scattered across Normandy's fields, abandoned after D-Day. They are made of heavy steel, designed to rip the bottoms out of landing craft. Sekulin thinks they might serve a different purpose. He finds a welding torch in some of the steel obstacles. He cuts them into prongs and welds them to the front of a Sherman tank. The result looks crude, almost comical. But when the modified tank approaches a hedgerow, the steel prongs bite into the earthen bank. Instead of climbing over the hedgerow and exposing its belly, the tank drives through it, plowing a gap wide enough for infantry to follow. Kulin has invented what will become known as the Rhino hedge cutter. By late July, 500 Sherman tanks will be modified with this device. But in mid-June, it is just one sergeant's desperate improvisation in the face of terrain that threatens to stall the invasion as effectively as German panzers. The hedgerows transform warfare into something barely recognizable to military theorists. Armored warfare doctrine emphasizes mobility, mass, and concentration of force. In the bocage, none of these principles apply. Fields are rarely more than 200 yards across. This means tanks can barely maneuver before encountering another hedgerow. Visibility is measured in yards rather than miles. Artillery observers cannot see targets. Tank crews cannot identify threats until they are on top of them. The battlefield becomes hyper-localized. A squad with a machine gun can hold off a battalion for hours. A single anti-tank gun hidden in a hedgerow can destroy an entire column of vehicles. The Americans, trained for mobile warfare in open terrain, yet find themselves fighting a battle that more closely resembles the Western Front of World War I than any campaign they prepared for. German defenders exploit the terrain with ruthless efficiency. Machine gun teams position themselves at the corners of fields where they can fire along two hedgerows simultaneously. Mortars, invisible behind the hedges, drop rounds with precision on predicted paths of advance. Snipers tie themselves into trees, where they can see over the vegetation and pick off officers and NCOs. The Germans have learned to plant mines in the gaps through hedgerows, knowing American forces will funnel through these natural choke points. They pre-register artillery on every obvious approach. When American infantry finally fight their way into a field, they often find it pre-sighted by every German weapon in the area. The casualty rates begin to mirror the worst battles of the First World War. Company after company attacks, bleeds, and is withdrawn, having gained perhaps 200 yards at the cost of half its strength. The Americans adapt slowly and at terrible cost. They learn to avoid the obvious gaps through hedgerows, instead blowing new gaps with explosives in unexpected locations. They learn to attack hedgerows from multiple directions simultaneously, preventing German machine guns from covering all approaches. They learn that artillery is nearly useless against defenders hidden behind earthen banks. They need infantry with grenades and flamethrowers to go in and dig out each position individually. Close air support proves difficult. Pilots cannot identify friend from enemy when both sides are separated by yards rather than miles. Bombs intended for German positions land on American troops with disturbing frequency. The bocage nullifies most of America's technological advantages. One solution emerges through brutal trial and error. Infantry and tanks must work together in ways doctrine never anticipated. Tank commanders learn to move their vehicles only when supporting infantry has cleared the next hedgerow. Infantry learn to stay close enough to tanks to use their firepower, but far enough back to avoid becoming targets themselves. This kind of coordination requires constant communication, which means radios. But radios are in short supply and often malfunction in the humid Norman summer, so tank infantry teams develop cruder methods. Tankers weld telephones to the outside of their vehicles, so infantry can talk to the crew without exposing themselves. Hand signals evolve. Each hedgerow becomes a small unit action, where a sergeant's initiative matters more than a general's strategy. The American military, which prided itself on planning and organization, discovers it must fight a soldier's war where junior leaders make the difference between success and slaughter. The Germans face their own challenges. They lack fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements. Allied air power makes daylight movement suicidal. Every concentration of vehicles becomes a target for fighter bombers. German commanders must choose between sending reinforcements forward piecemeal, where they can be isolated and destroyed, or holding them back in hopes of assembling enough force for a coordinated counterattack that might never come. They choose the former. For 6 weeks, German units feed themselves into the meat grinder, reinforcing failure rather than accepting strategic withdrawal. Hitler's standing order to hold every inch of ground makes operational sense impossible. Units fight until destroyed, then are rebuilt and destroyed again. The Germans are winning the tactical battle, making the Allies pay heavily for every field, but they are losing the strategic war of attrition. By early July, American casualties have reached 62,000, more than D-Day, and the days immediately following combined. The advance has covered barely 20 miles in 30 days. Soldiers begin calling certain locations by grimly humorous names. The Calvados Valley becomes Purple Heart Lane. The Hedgerows become the Green Hell. Medics report increasing cases of combat exhaustion, the polite term for soldiers who simply cannot function any longer. Men who performed heroically on D-Day become listless and unresponsive after weeks in the bocage. The endless close-quarters fighting, the inability to see more than yards ahead, the knowledge that death could come from any hedgerow without warning, all combine to break down even experienced troops. Replacement rates cannot keep up with casualties. Companies that should number 200 men go into action with 100. Platoons commanded by lieutenants are led by sergeants. Squads are led by privates first class because all the corporals are dead or wounded. Field Marshal von Kluge, who has replaced von Rundstedt as commander in the West, sends a report to Hitler that captures the German perspective. In the East, he writes, the vastness of space permits a loss of territory without immediate disaster. Here in Normandy, we are caught in a web. Every retreat endangers the entire position. Yet, we cannot attack successfully against Allied material superiority. We can only delay the inevitable while bleeding the enemy. Hitler responds by forbidding retreat and promising reinforcements that do not exist. The Bocage campaign continues its grinding mathematics. The Allies gain yards. The Germans extract maximum casualties for each yard. Neither side can break the stalemate through tactical action. Both wait for something, anything, that might change the equation. That something will come in late July, not through tactical innovation, but through overwhelming violence. The legacy of the Bocage battle extends beyond the casualty lists. American forces learn that their pre-war training, focused on open warfare and mobile operations, and prepared them poorly for the reality of combat in complex terrain against a skilled enemy. They learn that technological superiority matters less than small unit leadership and soldier initiative. They learn that battles are won not by perfect plans, but by sergeants willing to improvise and soldiers willing to keep attacking long after any reasonable person would quit. These lessons, purchased in blood in the hedgerows of Normandy, will serve them well in the battles ahead. But in June and early July 1944, those future victories seem distant. The present consists of another hedgerow, another field, another day of costly small gains. The Green Hell has no visible end. June 13th, 1944. Villers-Bocage, France. Morning. Ein SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann peers through the commander's cupola of his Tiger tank. In the village below, a British armored column has halted. Tanks are parked bumper to bumper along the main street. Crews have dismounted. Some are brewing tea. Wittmann has stumbled upon the lead elements of the British 7th Armored Division, the famous Desert Rats, veterans of North Africa. They have pushed farther inland than any other British unit, hoping to break through toward Caen. Instead, they have driven into an ambush they do not yet know has been sprung. Wittmann counts 13 Cromwell tanks, several half-tracks, and various support vehicles. His Tiger is alone. His squadron is minutes behind. Any reasonable commander would wait for support. Wittmann orders his driver forward. In what follows becomes one of the war's most remarkable small unit actions. Wittmann's Tiger emerges from side streets and fires at point-blank range into the British column. The first shot destroys the lead tank. The second destroys the rear tank, trapping everything in between. British crews scramble for their vehicles. Wittmann methodically destroys tank after tank before they can turn their turrets. His 88mm gun penetrates the Cromwell's armor as if it were paper. In 15 minutes, Wittmann destroys 13 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and 15 half-tracks and transport vehicles. British survivors abandon their vehicles and flee on foot. Wittmann's single Tiger has stopped an entire British armored thrust. When his squadron arrives and the British send reinforcements, the battle expands. By day's end, the British have lost more than half their attacking force. The road to Caen remains blocked. Villers-Bocage encapsulates the British experience in Normandy. Montgomery's forces face the bulk of German armor. Elite SS divisions, equipped with Tigers and Panthers, fighting from prepared defensive positions. Unlike the Americans in the Bocage, who face second-rate infantry divisions with minimal armor support, the British and Canadian forces confront the most dangerous units in the German military. This is intentional. Montgomery's strategy, though never explicitly stated to avoid alarming his American allies, is to draw German armor onto British positions in the east, pinning it in place through continuous attacks, thereby allowing American forces in the west to break through weakened defenses. The cost of this strategy, paid in British and Canadian casualties, is deliberately hidden behind vague communiques about progress toward Caen. Operation Charnwood, launched on July 8th, demonstrates the brutal arithmetic of Montgomery's approach. The objective is Caen, originally expected to fall on D-Day, now a month overdue. The Royal Air Force drops 2,500 tons of bombs on the city the night before the attack. The bombing is supposed to destroy German defenses. Instead, it creates mountains of rubble that block British tanks and provides perfect defensive positions for German troops. Canadian infantry attack into this devastation. The 12th SS Panzer Division defends with fanatical determination. House-to-house fighting continues for days. When British forces finally occupied the northern half of Caen on July 9th, the city is a wasteland. Thousands of French civilians are dead or homeless. German forces have withdrawn in good order to prepared positions on the southern outskirts. The tactical objective has been achieved at enormous cost, while the strategic situation remains unchanged. 10 days later, Montgomery launches Operation Goodwood, the largest British armored operation of the war. 1,100 tanks advance across open ground toward Bourget-Busse Ridge south of Caen. The plan assumes that preliminary bombing will have destroyed German defenses. The tanks advance in dense formations, presenting magnificent targets. German 88mm guns, dug in and camouflaged on the ridge, wait until the British armor is fully committed. Then they open fire. British tank commanders watch in horror as their lead units dissolve under a storm of armor-piercing rounds. The Tigers and Panthers outrange the British Cromwells and Shermans by 1,000 yards. German tanks can destroy British armor before the British can even return effective fire. British crews describe the experience as murder rather than combat. Over 3 days, the British lose 400 tanks and suffer 5,000 casualties. They gain 7 miles. German defenders lose 70 tanks. The exchange rate is unsustainable. Canadian forces endure perhaps the worst of Montgomery's grinding strategy. At Verrières Ridge on July 25th, the Black Watch Regiment receives orders to attack across open ground against dug-in German positions. The officers planning the attack know the ground is swept by German machine guns and anti-tank guns. They know the regiment will take heavy casualties. They attack anyway because the strategic plan requires constant pressure on German positions, regardless of local conditions. 315 men attack, 123 become casualties in 4 hours. The regiment gains 200 yards. This scene repeats itself across the British and Canadian sectors through July and into August. Units attack, bleed, withdraw to reorganize, then attack again. The gains are measured in yards. The casualties are measured in thousands. The psychological strain on British and Canadian troops becomes severe. Unlike the Americans fighting in the Bocage, who at least feel they are making progress, however slow, British forces attack the same objectives repeatedly with similar results. Caen becomes an obsession and a curse. Every soldier knows it should have fallen on D-Day. Every soldier knows Montgomery publicly promised it would fall quickly. As weeks turn into months, the failure becomes personal. Morale suffers. Relations between British and American forces become strained. American soldiers, reading their newspapers, see stories questioning why Montgomery's forces are stuck while Patton's forces race across France. They do not understand that Montgomery's strategy requires the British to be stuck, to hold German armor in place. British soldiers resent fighting the hardest battles, while Americans get the glory. Neither side sees the larger picture. The friction threatens Allied unity at the command level. Eisenhower, caught between his British deputy commander and his American generals, begins to doubt Montgomery's judgment. His private diary entries from July become increasingly critical. Old Montgomery is a good man, but too cautious. He writes on July 20th, "The British Second Army has done little except to hold." Eisenhower considers removing Montgomery from command. Only the intervention of Churchill, who threatens to make it a political crisis, prevents the change. What Eisenhower does not fully appreciate is that Montgomery's caution is strategic rather than temperamental. The British are pinning down 7 of 9 German panzer divisions in Normandy. Only 2 face the Americans. This imbalance creates the conditions for the American breakout. But explaining this openly would require admitting that British forces are being sacrificed to enable American success. Such admissions are politically impossible. The human cost of Montgomery's strategy becomes clear in casualty statistics. From D-Day through the end of July, British and Canadian forces suffered 53,000 casualties. American forces suffer 62,000, despite having twice as many troops engaged. The per capita casualty rate among British and Canadian forces is significantly higher. Specific units fare even worse. The British 50th Infantry Division suffers 75% casualties by the end of the campaign. The Canadian 2nd Infantry Division suffers similar rates. These are losses equivalent to World War I battles. Units are rebuilt multiple times with replacement troops who lack the training and cohesion of the originals. Combat effectiveness declines even as experience increases. By August, some British divisions are combat ineffective despite nominally full strength. The replacements cannot replace what was lost. As German commanders understand what Montgomery is doing, Field Marshal von Kluge reports to Hitler that the British are deliberately drawing German armor into attritional battles. He requests permission to withdraw to more defensible lines, conserving his forces for a mobile defense. Hitler refuses. Every inch of ground must be held. This plays into Montgomery's hands. By pinning German armor in place, by forcing them to fight static defensive battles against superior Allied firepower, Montgomery is destroying Germany's most valuable military asset. The panzers that Germany cannot replace are being worn down by British artillery and airstrikes. When the American breakout finally comes, German armor will be too weak and too far east to respond effectively. Montgomery's strategy succeeds. But success looks suspiciously like failure to everyone, except Montgomery himself. By late July, the situation in Normandy has stabilized into a pattern. British and Canadian forces attack in the east, suffer heavy casualties, gain minimal ground. German armor rushes to contain these attacks, preventing any breakthrough. American forces in the west grind slowly through the bocage, paying in blood for every hedgerow. Both sides are exhausted. Both sides are feeding in reinforcements as fast as they arrive. Neither side can achieve decisive breakthrough through current methods. The campaign has become World War I with better technology. Something must change. The Allies need a dramatic shift in approach, something that will shatter the stalemate through overwhelming force rather than tactical finesse. That something is being planned, where it will be called Operation Cobra. And it will work not because of careful preparation, but because the Allies are willing to accept catastrophic friendly fire casualties to deliver violence on a scale that makes tactical finesse irrelevant. July 27, 1944, near Le Loiret, France. S. Lieutenant Ernst Barkmann sits in the commander's position of his Panther tank, watching an American column approach. 15 Sherman tanks advance down a narrow road, confident in their numbers. They have no idea Barkmann is waiting. His Panther is positioned in a concealed position at the edge of a tree line, hull down, only the turret visible. The Americans come closer. Barkmann lets them enter the kill zone. Then he fires. The first Sherman explodes. Before the American tankers can react, Bachmann has destroyed 3 more. The column halts in confusion. Tanks try to reverse. Bachmann's gunner methodically works through the targets. 9 Shermans are destroyed in 15 minutes. The survivors retreat. Bachmann repositions his tank before American artillery can respond. It is just another day on the Western Front for a skilled German tank commander. Such encounters happen repeatedly. They rarely make it into official histories because they are embarrassingly one-sided. The Sherman tank has become a subject of bitter controversy among American tankers. Officially, it is an excellent tank, reliable, easy to maintain, produced in vast numbers. Unofficially, crews call them Ronsons, after the cigarette lighter company, whose slogan was, "Lights first time, every time." The nickname refers to the Sherman's tendency to catch fire when penetrated. The cause is simple physics combined with unfortunate design choices. Sherman tanks use gasoline engines, unlike German tanks which use diesel. Gasoline is more volatile. When an armor-piercing round penetrates a Sherman, the white-hot metal spray often ignites fuel or ammunition. The tank becomes an inferno in seconds. Crew survival depends on escaping within moments of penetration. Tankers who survive one burning Sherman often refuse to crew another. They request transfer to infantry, artillery, anything except another rolling coffin. The technical disparity between American and German tanks in Normandy is stark and undeniable. The standard Sherman mounts a 75mm gun. This gun can penetrate 74mm of armor at 500 yards. The German Panther, which has become the standard German medium tank, has 80mm of frontal armor sloped at 55 degrees. The sloping effectively doubles the armor thickness to 140mm. Simple mathematics reveals that the Sherman cannot penetrate a Panther from the front at combat ranges. The Sherman crew must maneuver to the side or rear, exposing themselves to fire to have any chance of a kill. Meanwhile, the Panther's 75mm gun, longer and higher velocity than the Sherman's, can penetrate the Sherman's frontal armor at 2,000 yards. The Panther can kill the Sherman before the Sherman can even return effective fire. This is not combat between equals. It is a shooting gallery. Against the Tiger, the disparity becomes absurd. The Tiger mounts an 88mm gun derived from the famous German anti-aircraft gun. This weapon can penetrate the Sherman's frontal armor at ranges exceeding 3,000 yards. The Tiger's frontal armor is 100mm thick, effectively impervious to the Sherman's gun at any practical range. American tankers develop desperate tactics. They hunt Tigers in packs, trying to swarm the German tank from multiple directions, hoping someone can get a shot at the thinner side or rear armor before the Tiger kills them all. After-action reports from American armored divisions are filled with bitter assessments. The Tiger and Panther are impervious to our 75mm gun at standard combat ranges, reads one report from the 3rd Armored Division. We must close to ranges under 200 yards, often under 100 yards, to achieve penetration. Then this requires accepting casualties among the vehicles making the approach. The British have a partial solution. They mount the 17-pounder anti-tank gun in modified Shermans, creating the Sherman Firefly. This gun can penetrate Panther and Tiger armor at reasonable combat ranges. But production is limited. British tank troops receive only 1 Firefly per 4 tanks. German tankers quickly learn to identify and target the Firefly first, recognizing it as the only real threat. American forces receive no Fireflies. They must rely on their 75mm guns, tank destroyers with higher velocity guns, or calling for air support. None of these solutions is satisfactory. Tank destroyers lack the armor to survive direct fire from German tanks. Though air support takes time to arrive and often cannot operate in bad weather or heavy terrain, American tank crews must fight and die in vehicles they know are inferior. The mystery is not why the Sherman underperforms against German heavy tanks. The mystery is why American forces are using Shermans for missions they were never designed to perform. The Sherman was designed in 1941 and 1942, when the expected opponent was the German Mark III and Mark IV, medium tanks with armor and guns comparable to the Sherman. The Sherman was intended for exploitation and pursuit after infantry and artillery had broken through enemy positions. It was meant to race through gaps, overrun supply lines, capture objectives behind the front lines. American doctrine called for tank destroyers, not tanks, to fight enemy armor. The Sherman was optimized for reliability, ease of production, and strategic mobility. It was specifically designed to be shipped across oceans and maintained by crews with moderate training. In these roles, the Sherman excels. But Normandy is not the breakout campaign American planners expected. Instead of pursuing defeated enemies across open country, American tanks are fighting German heavy armor in close terrain. This is exactly the mission the Sherman was designed to avoid. American tank destroyers, which mount high-velocity guns specifically for fighting tanks, prove too lightly armored to survive on the front lines. They are effective from ambush positions but cannot accompany infantry in assault. So the Sherman, by default, becomes the primary American response to German armor, despite being poorly suited for the role. American soldiers paid the price for pre-war planning assumptions that proved wrong. The doctrinal argument about whether tanks should fight tanks or exploit breakthroughs becomes academic when Shermans are the only armored vehicles available, and German tanks are sitting across the next field. General Jacob Devers, commanding American ground forces in southern France, submits a report after examining combat records. His conclusion is devastating. Sherman tanks require approximately a 5-to-1 numerical advantage to reliably defeat a Panther in combat. Against Tigers, the ratio is worse. This report is suppressed at higher headquarters. Public release would be catastrophic for morale, but tankers do not need reports to tell them what they learned through experience. Everyone knows the Germans have better tanks. The question is whether America can win despite this disadvantage. The answer, ultimately, is yes, but for reasons that have nothing to do with tank quality. America produces 49,000 Sherman tanks during the war. Germany produces 6,000 Panthers and 1,300 Tigers combined. America can afford to lose 5 Shermans for every Panther destroyed. Germany cannot afford to lose even the one Panther. The crew survival statistics reveal another dimension of the tank quality debate. When a Sherman is knocked out, approximately 80% of the crew escapes. The Sherman's height and spacious interior, often criticized as making it an easy target, actually saves lives. Hatches are large and accessible. Crews can bail out quickly. When a Panther is knocked out, only about 50% of the crew escapes. The Panther's lower profile and tighter interior, which provide better protection against enemy fire, become death traps when the tank is penetrated. Wounded crew members cannot be easily extracted. Fire spreads quickly in the confined space. German tanks have better armor and guns, but American tanks have better crew survivability. Whether this trade-off is acceptable depends on whether one is making policy or sitting in the tank. Tankers develop superstitions and rituals. Some refuse to load their primary ammunition storage in the hull sponsons, despite this reducing their combat load, because hull hits are most common. Others insist on riding with hatches open, ready to bail out instantly, despite this making them vulnerable to artillery and small arms fire. Some crews paint their tanks in elaborate camouflage schemes, convinced this provides protection. Others paint nothing, believing camouflage attracts attention. Replacement crews, arriving fresh from training, are easy to identify. They believe what they were taught about Sherman capabilities. Veteran crews know better. They teach the replacements the real tactics. Never attack a Panther or Tiger frontally. Always work in pairs or larger groups. Use terrain to close distance before engaging. If you see a Tiger and it sees you, reverse immediately and call for air support or artillery. Above all, keep moving. A stationary Sherman is a dead Sherman. The ultimate irony is that German tankers face their own problems despite having superior vehicles. Panthers are mechanically unreliable, prone to transmission failures and engine fires. Tigers consume fuel at prodigious rates and break down frequently. German tanks require more maintenance and more skilled mechanics than Shermans. In a war of attrition, reliability matters as much as armor and guns. A Panther that breaks down 20 miles behind the front line might as well not exist. A Sherman that can be repaired by its crew with standard tools and keeps running remains combat effective. By late summer 1944, many German panzer divisions are at half strength, not because their tanks were destroyed in combat, but because half their tanks are deadlined for maintenance. The numerically inferior Germans cannot afford this mechanical attrition. America's industrial advantage manifests not just in quantity, but in sustainability. The tank quality debate continues long after the war. Historians argue whether American commanders should have pushed for better tanks earlier, whether the Sherman's deficiencies cost unnecessary lives, whether different tactical doctrine could have compensated for technical inferiority. These arguments miss the larger point. The Sherman was good enough. Not good in any absolute sense, not superior to its German counterparts, but adequate to accomplish the mission when employed in sufficient numbers with adequate support. American soldiers in Normandy do not have the luxury of waiting for better equipment. They fight with what they have. Sometimes they win through superior tactics. Sometimes they win through superior numbers. Often they win simply by refusing to quit after taking losses that would cause other armies to retreat. The Sherman tank, like much American equipment in World War II, proves that adequacy combined with determination and industrial capacity can defeat excellence combined with fanaticism and resource scarcity. It is not a satisfying conclusion, but it is the truth that carries the Allies to victory. July 24th, 1944, near Saint-Lô, France, 10 o'clock in the morning. Lieutenant General Leslie McNair stands in an observation position watching American bombers approach. McNair is the highest-ranking American officer in the European theater, technically outranking even Eisenhower in the command structure. He has come to the front lines to observe Operation Cobra, the breakthrough offensive that is supposed to end the Bocage stalemate. He wants to see firsthand how American air power will pulverize German defenses. He is standing in what should be a safe position, well behind the front lines, marked with colored panels and smoke to identify friendly positions to the bombers overhead. The plan is simple. 1,500 heavy bombers will carpet a narrow section of the German front line with explosive tonnage unprecedented in military history. Then, American armor will pour through the gap. It is a brute force solution to a problem that has resisted tactical finesse. McNair watches the first bombers release their loads. The bombs fall short. They land on American positions. McNair and 111 other Americans die instantly, killed by their own bombs. Operation Cobra is supposed to begin on July 24th. The short bombing forces postponement. Some bombs hit their targets. Others devastate American positions. The confusion delays the ground attack. German commanders, alerted by the bombing, begin moving reinforcements to the sector. The element of surprise is compromised. But Eisenhower and Bradley decide to proceed anyway. They have staked everything on this offensive. Canceling now would hand the initiative back to the Germans and prolong the Normandy stalemate indefinitely. July 25th is designated as the new attack date. The bombing will be repeated, this time with strict instructions to bomb only beyond identified ground markers. Units in the forward positions pray that this time the bombers will hit the right targets. Many veterans of July 24th lack confidence. July 25th, 10 o'clock in the morning. The sky fills with aircraft. First come the fighter bombers, flying at low altitude to mark the target area with smoke. Then the medium bombers, dropping 500-pound bombs in waves. Finally, the heavy bombers, B-17S and B-24s, flying at 15,000 feet, releasing their loads in train. The sound is overwhelming, a continuous rolling thunder that goes on for 80 minutes without pause. 1,500 heavy bombers, 380 medium bombers, 550 fighter bombers, 4,000 tons of bombs falling on a rectangular area, 7,000 yards wide by 2,500 yards deep. It is the most concentrated aerial bombardment in history to this point. The German troops in the target area have no chance. Bunkers collapse, trenches cave in, tanks flip over from blast pressure, trees explode into splinters. The earth itself seems to heave and buckle. Survivors will describe the experience as being in hell. But again, some bombs fall short. Not as many as July 24th, but enough. 111 Americans are killed, 621 wounded. Among the dead are officers and NCOs who were supposed to lead the ground attack. Units that suffer friendly fire casualties lose cohesion even before the attack begins. Yet most bombs hit their intended targets. The German Panzer Lehr Division, positioned directly in the target area, is devastated. Its commander later reports that approximately 70% of his combat strength is lost in the bombing. Entire companies cease to exist. Battalion command posts are obliterated. Communications are severed. The survivors, dazed and bleeding, emerge from their bunkers to find a moonscape. Nothing could have survived this level of bombardment, except that some did survive, and they immediately begin trying to establish defensive positions in the rubble. The window for exploitation is measured in hours. American ground forces attack at 11 o'clock. The infantry advance into the bombed area, expecting to find only corpses. Instead, they encounter scattered resistance from German survivors. Some bunkers, deep enough or lucky enough, remained intact. Machine gun nests open a fire. The attack bogs down in the same close quarters fighting that has characterized the entire Normandy campaign. This is not the breakthrough that was promised. It looks like another costly incremental advance. By mid-afternoon, some American commanders fear Cobra has failed. The massive bombing has not created the hoped-for gap in German defenses. It has merely softened them. The infantry will have to fight for every yard, all just as they have for the past 7 weeks. The difference between success and failure hinges on whether American armor can exploit before German reinforcements arrive. On July 27th, 3 days into Cobra, the breakthrough finally comes. The 2nd Armored Division punches through at Saint-Gilles, reaching open ground beyond the Bocage. Suddenly, the battle transforms from attritional infantry combat to mobile warfare. American tanks race through the gap, bypassing German strongpoints, pushing deeper into the German rear than any Allied forces since D-Day. German commanders try to organize a defensive line. They lack the forces and the communication to do so effectively. The bombing and 3 days of intense ground combat have shattered German cohesion in the Cobra sector. Individual units fight on. But there is no coordinated defense. For the first time since D-Day, American forces encounter German troops retreating rather than defending. The psychological impact is immense. German soldiers, who have held every position stubbornly for 2 months, are running. The invincible Wehrmacht is retreating in disorder. The Normandy campaign has reached its turning point. On July 30th, the Avranches crossroads falls to American forces. This single road junction becomes the cork in the bottle. Every German unit west of Avranches is now cut off. Every American unit pushing through Avranches enters Brittany and open country beyond. George Patton's Third Army is officially activated. Patton has been waiting in England, the supposed commander of the Phantom 1st United States Army Group, holding German attention at Pas-de-Calais. And now he is unleashed with a real army and real objectives. Within hours of taking command, Patton orders his tanks through Avranches 24 hours per day. Traffic control becomes critical. Military police stand at the crossroads directing vehicles. The column stretches for miles. German artillery tries to close the gap. American engineers repair damage as fast as Germans can inflict it. For 4 days, Avranches becomes the most important square mile in France. Everything depends on keeping this corridor open. The cost of Cobra is substantial, but acceptable by the grim mathematics of war. 7,000 American casualties in the first week, including the friendly fire victims. But they have accomplished what 2 months of attritional fighting could not. They have broken through. German casualties are harder to quantify because entire units have been destroyed or scattered. Perhaps 20,000 Germans killed, wounded, or captured in the Cobra sector. More importantly, German defensive cohesion is shattered. For the first time since D-Day, American forces are advancing faster than German forces can retreat. The momentum has shifted decisively. The question is no longer whether the Allies can break out of Normandy, but how far they can go before German defenses solidify again. The friendly fire casualties haunt American commanders. 136 men killed, 621 wounded, over 2 days by American bombs. Among them, the highest-ranking American combat casualty in Europe. Was it worth it? The men who died would say no. Their families would say no. But in the cold calculus of military necessity, the answer is yes. The bombing, despite its tragic errors, destroyed enough German combat power to enable the breakthrough. Without Cobra, the Normandy campaign might have dragged on for months, costing tens of thousands more casualties in incremental advances through the bocage. The friendly fire was not acceptable, but it was accepted. Commanders made the decision to proceed with the second day of bombing despite knowing the risk. They decided that the potential gain justified the certain cost. This is the burden of command that no one volunteers for, but someone must bear. The technological and tactical lessons of Cobra ripple through the Allied command structure. Close air support, previously considered too risky in fluid situations, has proven devastatingly effective when properly executed. Despite the friendly fire incidents, the bombing accomplished what weeks of conventional artillery could not. This vindicates the American approach of using air power as flying artillery. It also reveals the limits of precision. Even with colored panels, smoke markers, and strict instructions, bombs fell on friendly troops. The margin between success and friendly fire is measured in hundreds of yards and seconds of timing. Future operations will incorporate even more elaborate safety measures, but the fundamental risk remains. When you drop 4,000 tons of bombs in a 7,000-yard area where friendly and enemy troops are separated by a few hundred yards, some bombs will hit the wrong targets. Accepting this risk becomes part of American operational doctrine. And the Germans draw different lessons from Cobra. They conclude that defending a continuous line against American material superiority is futile. Instead, they begin developing tactics based on mobile defense, strong points, and counterattacks rather than static positions. But these tactics require resources Germany no longer has. They need fuel for mobile operations. They need armor for counterattacks. They need air cover to protect movement. They have none of these in sufficient quantities. So, the lesson becomes theoretical rather than practical. German commanders know what they should do, but lack the means to do it. They continue fighting with the methods that have failed because they have no alternative. Meanwhile, American forces, having discovered that overwhelming violence can substitute for tactical finesse, prepare to do it again. The end of the bocage stalemate is over. The race across France is about to begin, and it will prove that sometimes victory comes not through elegant tactics or superior equipment, but through the willingness to accept catastrophic casualties to deliver violence on a scale that makes resistance impossible. August 1st, 1944. Avranches, France. George Patton stands at the crossroads watching his tanks roll past. The Third Army has been activated for less than 24 hours. Already lead elements are 30 miles beyond Avranches, racing into Brittany. Patton has waited 2 months for this moment, relegated to command of a phantom army while younger generals fought the real battles. The deception role frustrated him nearly to madness. He is a warrior commanding inflatable tanks and plywood aircraft. Now, finally, he has real divisions and real missions. He intends to make up for lost time. His orders to his corps commanders are simple: bypass resistance, keep moving, live off the land if supplies run short, push until you meet genuine opposition, then push harder. The methodical attritional warfare of the bocage is over. Patton is about to demonstrate what happens when American armor operates in terrain suited to its capabilities. The 4th Armored Division exemplifies Patton's approach. On August 1st, it advances 40 miles, capturing intact bridges over the Saloon River. German defenders, expecting a cautious advance after weeks of hedgerow fighting, are overrun before they can establish positions. On August 2nd, the division advances another 30 miles. German garrison troops in Brittany, now mostly second-rate units manning coastal defenses, suddenly find American tanks in their rear areas. They have no transport, no reserves, no clear orders. Many surrender without fighting. Others retreat into fortified ports like Brest and Saint-Nazaire, where they will be besieged for months. But the ports do not matter. Patton has already decided that capturing Breton ports is less important than racing into central France. Let infantry divisions besiege the ports. His armor will keep moving east. On August 7th, the 15th Corps captures Le Mans, 200 miles from the Normandy beaches. The city falls almost without resistance. French resistance fighters rise up inside the city as American tanks arrive, capturing key buildings and blocking German retreat routes. It ain't over 20,000 German soldiers surrender in and around Le Mans, including garrison troops, stragglers from units destroyed in Normandy, and headquarters personnel caught by the sudden American advance. The speed of Patton's thrust has outpaced German communication. Some German units receive orders to defend positions already overrun. Others retreat toward positions already captured. Command and control breaks down. The Wehrmacht in western France begins to dissolve from an organized military force into scattered groups trying to avoid capture. Patton's advance creates a strategic opportunity that will define the next phase of the campaign. His Third Army is racing east, while British and Canadian forces push south from Caen. German forces in Normandy are caught between these pincers. If Patton turns north at the right moment, if British forces push hard enough south, the entire German 7th Army might be trapped. Eisenhower and Bradley see the possibility. So does Patton. On August 10th, Patton receives orders to halt at Ardennes and not advance further north. The rationale is that British and Canadian forces, pushing south from Caen toward Falaise, will close the pocket from the north. American forces halting at Ardennes will prevent friendly fire incidents when the two armies meet. Patton protests furiously. "Let me go on to Falaise," he argues, "and we will drive the British back into the sea for another Dunkirk." The order stands. Patton halts at Ardennes. The Falaise Gap remains open for several more days. Thousands of Germans escape who might have been trapped. The halt order becomes one of the war's great controversies. And was it necessary to prevent friendly fire? Was it a political decision to let British forces have the glory of closing the pocket? Was it simply overcaution by commanders who did not yet grasp how thoroughly German cohesion had collapsed? The debate continues for decades. What is clear is that Patton's forces could have pushed to Falaise days before British and Canadian forces arrived. Whether they could have held the position against German breakout attempts is less certain. Patton's divisions are dispersed across hundreds of miles. Their supply lines are stretched thin. Concentrating enough force to hold Falaise might have required pulling units back from elsewhere, slowing the overall advance. The decision to halt looks cautious in retrospect, but may have been prudent given the information available at the time. Yet Patton does not halt for long. While some divisions wait at Ardennes, others continue east. The Third Army splits into multiple columns, racing toward the Seine River and beyond. German forces cannot establish a defensive line because they do not know where American spearheads will appear next. Patton's tactics deliberately create confusion. He sends reconnaissance units far ahead of main forces, often 50 to 100 miles in front. These scouts report German positions, but by the time German commanders organize defenses, American main forces have already bypassed the position and are attacking from a different direction. It is mobile warfare at its finest, the kind of campaign Patton has studied and dreamed about his entire career. His tanks advance 400 miles in 26 days, all liberating 47,000 square miles of France. But speed creates its own problems. Fuel becomes critical. Sherman tanks consume approximately 400,000 gallons of gasoline per day when the Third Army is at full operational tempo. That fuel must be trucked from Normandy beaches, now 400 miles away. The Red Ball Express, a dedicated truck convoy system, operates around the clock to supply Patton's advance. 6,000 trucks drive one-way circuits from the beaches to forward dumps and back. 75% of these drivers are African-American soldiers, members of quartermaster truck companies who find themselves in the most crucial logistics role of the campaign. They drive without sleep, often under air attack, maintaining the supply line that keeps Patton moving. But even 6,000 trucks cannot deliver enough fuel for Patton's appetites. By late August, Third Army divisions are running on empty. Tanks are abandoned when they run out of fuel. Units halt for days waiting for supply convoys. The advance slows not because of German resistance, but because of logistics. German forces in Brittany illustrate the strategic irrelevance of territory without mobility. Approximately 100,000 German troops are bottled up in Breton ports. They occupy fortified positions. They have supplies for months. They are completely irrelevant to the campaign's outcome. Patton assigns one corps to contain them and ignores them otherwise. The Germans cannot break out because they lack transport and armored support. They cannot be supplied because the Allies control the seas. Again, they sit in their fortresses while the war passes them by. Eventually, some will surrender when conditions become unbearable. Others will hold out until the end of the war in Europe, technically undefeated but strategically meaningless. It is a microcosm of Germany's larger strategic situation. Holding territory matters less than maintaining mobile forces. Germany is trading mobility for static defense, and the exchange dooms them. Hitler's interference in German operations reaches new levels of destructiveness during August. He forbids retreat from any position. He demands counterattacks to recapture lost territory. He insists that every fortified port be held to the last man. These orders guarantee maximum German casualties for minimum strategic benefit. All field commanders who try to conduct mobile defense or strategic withdrawal are relieved or court-martialed. Those who obey Hitler's orders lose their forces for no gain. The German military, which prides itself on tactical flexibility and operational art, is reduced to following orders that any junior officer can see are suicidal. The gap between Hitler's perception of the situation and reality on the ground widens daily. He sees maps showing German units in their assigned positions. He does not see that many of these units have been destroyed or scattered, that the symbols on his maps represent phantoms. His orders are based on a fantasy world that exists only in his headquarters. By mid-August, Patton's advance has fundamentally altered the campaign. The question is no longer whether the Allies can break out of Normandy, but whether they can trap and destroy the German armies before those armies retreat to defensible positions on the German border. The Falaise pocket offers one opportunity for encirclement. But even as that battle develops, Patton is looking further east. He sees the possibility of reaching the Rhine River before German defenses can solidify. He sees the potential to end the war in 1944. What he does not yet see are the supply limitations that will halt his advance just as it reaches momentum. The race across France is magnificent, a demonstration of American mobile warfare at its best. But races require fuel, and fuel requires logistics, and logistics require ports closer to the front than Normandy's beaches. If the failure to capture and open Antwerp quickly enough will prove more consequential than any tactical decision made during the August advance. But in early August, as his tanks roll toward the Seine, Patton believes anything is possible. For a brief moment, he is right. August 6th, 1944. 11:45 at night. Bletchley Park, England. A cryptanalyst at Britain's top-secret code-breaking facility finishes decrypting an Enigma intercept from German command in France. She reads it once, then again, certain she has made an error. The message is from Adolf Hitler personally, ordering an immediate armored counterattack toward the coast at Avranches. 4 panzer divisions are to attack westward, cutting off Patton's Third Army and driving to the sea. The attack will begin in less than 3 hours. She passes the decrypt to her supervisor. Within minutes, it reaches the intelligence liaison officer, who communicates directly with Eisenhower's headquarters. The message arrives at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force before many German field commanders receive their own copies of the order. Ultra, the Allied code-breaking operation, has once again given the Allies a decisive advantage. They will know about Hitler's counterattack before it begins. They will know its objective, its strength, and its timing. The German plan is doomed before the first tank moves. August 7th, 2 o'clock in the morning. 4 German panzer divisions begin their attack near Mortagne, the 2nd SS, Panzer Division, 1st 116th Panzer Division, 2nd Panzer Division, and elements of the 117th Panzer Division. Approximately 120 tanks total strike the positions of the American 30th Infantry Division. The Germans attack in darkness, hoping to achieve surprise and breakthrough before Allied air power can respond at dawn. They achieve initial success. American positions are overrun. German tanks penetrate several miles into American rear areas. Some American units retreat in disorder. Others establish hasty defensive positions and hold. By dawn, the German attack has created a dangerous penetration but has not achieved the breakthrough Hitler envisioned. German spearheads are isolated, surrounded by American forces who, forewarned by ultra-intelligence, have positioned reserves to contain exactly this type of attack. The critical position is Hill 317, a dominating height overlooking Mortagne. 700 men from the 2nd Battalion, 120th Infantry Regiment occupy the hill when the German attack begins. They are surrounded within hours. German forces control all roads to the hill. The battalion is cut off, out of contact with higher headquarters, low on ammunition and medical supplies. Any rational assessment suggests they should surrender or attempt to break out. Instead, they dig in and prepare to hold. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Eads Hardaway, sends a radio message. "We are surrounded. We will hold. Airdrop supplies if possible. If not, we will hold anyway." It is not dramatic or eloquent. It is simple statement of fact. The battalion will hold Hill 317 because losing it would give Germans observation over the entire American position. Sometimes, all war reduces to such simplicities. This hill matters, we hold it, or we die. There is nothing more to discuss. For 6 days, the surrounded battalion holds Hill 317. German forces attack repeatedly, trying to clear the position. American defenders fight with decreasing ammunition and increasing casualties. On August 8th, P-47 Thunderbolts attempt to drop supplies. Some containers land inside American positions. Others land in German-controlled areas. The Germans use captured American supplies against the defenders. On August 9th, the Americans are down to 1 day's rations and critically low ammunition. German loudspeaker broadcasts offer honorable surrender. The Americans respond with rifle fire. On August 10th, another supply drop arrives, this one more successful. Ammunition and medical supplies reach the defenders. They will hold longer. On August 12th, American forces finally break through to the hill. 300 of the original 700 defenders are dead or wounded. They have held a position that any objective analysis said was untenable. Their stand has anchored the entire American defense. But Hill 317 is a sideshow compared to the aerial battle over Mortain. At dawn on August 8th, the weather clears. Allied fighter bombers launch attack after attack against the German columns. Typhoons, Thunderbolts, Mustangs, all carrying rockets and bombs, sweep over the battlefield. German tanks, caught in the open without air cover, become targets in a shooting gallery. Luftwaffe fighters are conspicuously absent. Germany can no longer contest air superiority over the battlefield. The pilots describe it as the most target-rich environment they have ever seen. German tanks and vehicles fill every road. Many are destroyed. Many more are damaged or abandoned when crews flee the relentless air attacks. German commanders send desperate messages to headquarters describing the carnage. All movement is impossible under enemy air attack. One report reads, "We are losing tanks faster to aircraft than to ground combat. Request immediate air support." The request goes unanswered because there is no air support to send. The effectiveness of Allied air attacks at Mortain becomes controversial after the war. Initial pilot reports claim hundreds of German tanks destroyed. Post-battle analysis suggests the numbers were far lower. Perhaps 100 tanks destroyed by all causes over 6 days. Many German tanks were abandoned intact when crews fled or ran out of fuel. Some tanks reported destroyed were merely damaged and later recovered. The psychological impact of the air attacks exceeded their physical destruction. German panzer crews, veterans of the Eastern Front where Luftwaffe provided at least some air cover, are unprepared for the complete air superiority Allied forces enjoy in France. They feel helpless, unable to move or fight effectively, hunted from above without recourse. This psychological defeat contributes to the collapse of German offensive momentum as much as actual tank losses. By August 9th, the Rhine counteroffensive has clearly failed. German forces have advanced perhaps 10 miles toward Avranches, and they are nowhere near breaking through to the coast. American forces, forewarned and reinforced, contain the penetration and begin counterattacking. Field Marshal von Kluge, commanding German forces in France, sends a message to Hitler requesting permission to withdraw and establish a defensive line further east. Hitler refuses. The attack must continue. More forces will be committed. Von Kluge knows this is madness. Every hour the panzers remain. Around Mortain is another hour they are exposed to Allied air attack and ground counterattack. But he cannot disobey a direct Führer order. He commits his remaining reserves to the attack. They accomplish nothing except to concentrate even more German forces in the developing pocket. The Mortain counterattack reveals Hitler's complete detachment from military reality. His order was based on map symbols and wishful thinking, rather than actual force capabilities. He believed 4 panzer divisions could break through to the coast despite Allied air superiority, despite stretched supply lines, despite ultra-intelligence giving Allies complete foreknowledge of the plan. He believed this because he needed to believe it. Accepting that Germany could not counterattack successfully meant accepting that Germany had lost the campaign. Hitler's psychology cannot accommodate this reality. So, he orders attacks that cannot succeed. When they fail, he blames his generals for insufficient will, or betrayal, rather than accepting the attacks were impossible from the start. This pattern will repeat throughout the remaining months of the war. Germany will squander its remaining mobile forces in counterattacks ordered by a dictator who no longer understands the war he is fighting. For the Allies, Mortain is a gift. Instead of retreating when their position in Normandy became untenable, German forces have counterattacked and driven themselves deeper into a developing trap. The 4 panzer divisions committed at Mortain are now concentrated in exactly the place Allied forces can most easily encircle them. Patton's Third Army is racing around the German southern flank. British and Canadian forces are pushing down from the north. The Germans at Mortain sit directly in the path of a closing vice. If Allied forces can close the pocket quickly enough, they will trap not just the Mortain attack force, but the entire German 7th Army. Tens of thousands of German soldiers and hundreds of tanks will be surrounded. The battle that will be remembered as Falaise is developing not because of Allied planning, but because of German operational lunacy. Hitler, trying to retrieve the situation through offensive action, has instead created the conditions for the most decisive German defeat of the Western Front campaign. Von Kluge realizes the danger by August 10th. He requests permission to withdraw from the Mortain salient. Hitler again refuses. The attack will continue. Von Kluge, caught between military reality and political necessity, does nothing. German forces remain in place, taking casualties, accomplishing nothing. On August 12th, Hitler finally authorizes limited withdrawal. By then, it is too late. Allied forces have closed in from 3 sides. The only escape route is a narrow corridor near Falaise. Tens of thousands of German soldiers begin a desperate retreat toward that closing gap. The Mortain counteroffensive, launched with the goal of cutting off American forces, instead cuts off German forces. It is perhaps the most counterproductive German operation of the entire Western Front campaign. And it happened because Hitler ordered it, and because no German commander had the courage or authority to refuse an order they knew would end in disaster. August 12, 1944. Hill 262 near Chambois, France. Polish troops of the 1st Armored Division climb toward the summit. They are exhausted, having fought continuously for 3 days with minimal resupply. But they know this hill matters. From its peak, they will overlook the last escape route from the Falaise pocket. Tens of thousands of German soldiers are trapped between American forces pushing from the south, British and Canadian forces pushing from the north, and now Polish forces seizing this final high ground to the east. When the Poles reach the summit and establish defensive positions, they will close the pocket. Everything trapped inside will be destroyed or captured. The hill is designated Point 262, or the Mace, on Polish maps. It will become the cork in the bottle. German forces realize this simultaneously. They begin attacking the hill from all directions, trying to keep the escape route open. For 3 days, Polish troops will hold this hill against desperate German attacks. Their stand will seal the fate of an entire German army. Inside the pocket, chaos reigns. Approximately 100,000 German soldiers, 500 tanks, 10,000 vehicles, and uncounted numbers of horses are compressed into an area roughly 10 miles by 6 miles. The roads are clogged with retreating units, supply trains, refugees, wounded soldiers and ambulances, and headquarters staffs fleeing with whatever files they can carry. Allied aircraft circle overhead, like birds of prey, attacking anything that moves. Fighter bombers make repeated passes, firing rockets and cannon into the packed roads. There is no defense. German anti-aircraft guns have either been destroyed or abandoned for lack of ammunition. The Luftwaffe is absent. German troops can only endure the attacks or flee into the fields, where they become targets for Allied artillery. The pocket has become an abattoir. Dilt and everyone inside knows their only hope is to reach the gap near Chambois before it closes completely. Artillery fire increases the horror. Allied forward observers, positioned on the surrounding high ground, can see into the entire pocket. They call down fire from hundreds of guns. Shells explode among the packed German columns with devastating effect. There is no place to hide, no cover, no way to escape the predetermined coordinates artillery crews have plotted for every road and crossroads in the pocket. Some German units try to fight their way out. They organize attacks against Allied positions, hoping to break through. Most fail, some achieve temporary success, creating small gaps, only to have those gaps closed by Allied reserves. The lucky Germans are those who slip through at night, moving cross-country, abandoning their vehicles and heavy equipment. The unlucky majority remain trapped, subjected to continuous air and artillery attack. The moral dimension of the Falaise battle disturbs even hardened soldiers. Allied pilots report attacking ambulances clearly marked with Red Cross symbols. They justify this by noting that German forces have used ambulances to transport ammunition and troops, making them legitimate targets. But many pilots are uncomfortable with the blanket destruction. They describe attacking horse-drawn wagons filled with refugees and wounded. They describe German soldiers waving white flags while Allied artillery continues firing. They describe roads so clogged with destroyed vehicles and dead horses that new attacks simply add to the carnage without achieving military purpose. The killing continues not because it serves tactical objectives, but because stopping seems like letting the enemy escape. The pocket becomes a killing ground, where professional military action blurs into mass slaughter. On August 17th, American and Canadian forces meet near Chambois, officially closing the pocket. But the meeting is not complete. Gaps remain where German forces continue to infiltrate through Allied lines. Polish troops on Hill 262 fight off continuous German attacks trying to keep these gaps open. The fighting around the hill becomes desperate hand-to-hand combat. German forces, knowing this is their last chance to escape, attack with suicidal determination. Polish troops, low on ammunition and reinforcements, hold because retreat would mean letting the enemy escape. For 3 days, the battle rages on the hill and in the approaches around it. German escape attempts continue until August 20th, when the last organized resistance inside the pocket collapses. The aftermath shocks even veteran soldiers. Eisenhower tours the battlefield on August 22nd, 48 hours after the pocket closes. He later writes that the battlefield at Falaise was unquestionably one of the greatest killing grounds of any of the war areas. He describes scenes that could only be described by Dante. Roads are choked with destroyed vehicles, dead horses, and human corpses. The August heat accelerates decomposition. The smell becomes overpowering. Burial details work for days clearing the roads of bodies and carcasses. 1,500 dead horses are counted in one small area. Destroyed tanks and vehicles number in the thousands. The exact human casualty count remains uncertain. At least 10,000 Germans died in the pocket. 50,000 more are captured. Perhaps 20 to 40,000 escaped before the pocket closed completely. The uncertainty about escapes becomes another post-war controversy. Critics argue the gap should have been closed sooner. They point to Patton's halt at Argentan on August 10th. If American forces had pushed to Falaise immediately, they might have closed the pocket days earlier, trapping more Germans. Defenders respond that Patton's forces were dispersed and low on fuel. Concentrating enough strength to close and hold the pocket would have required pulling forces from other sectors, potentially allowing other German escapes. The debate misses the larger point. The Falaise pocket destroyed German combat power in France, regardless of how many individual soldiers escaped. The Germans lost their tanks, artillery, trucks, and heavy equipment. Soldiers who escaped on foot might reach German lines, but they are no longer effective combat units. They lack weapons, organization, and cohesion. Reconstituting them will take months Germany does not have. The material losses at Falaise exceed even the human casualties in strategic importance. 344 tanks and assault guns destroyed or abandoned. 2,447 trucks destroyed, 252 artillery pieces lost. This represents the heavy equipment of approximately 15 German divisions. Germany cannot replace these losses. Tank production is struggling to replace Eastern Front losses. Truck production has been crippled by Allied bombing. Artillery production focuses on anti-aircraft guns for homeland defense. The equipment lost at Falaise represents months of production that Germany needed elsewhere. Even if the 20,000 to 40,000 escaped soldiers can be re-equipped, it will take until late autumn to create combat-effective units. By then, Allied forces will be approaching the German border. The psychological impact on German troops exceeds the material losses. Survivors of Falaise describe feelings of abandonment and betrayal. They were ordered to hold positions until surrounded, then ordered to break out through killing grounds, then blamed when they failed to execute impossible orders. Many lose faith in German command competence. Some lose faith in the possibility of German victory. These attitudes spread as survivors are integrated into new units. The German army that reforms on the German border after Falaise is materially weaker and psychologically shattered. It will recover some effectiveness through shortened supply lines and defensive positions. But the confidence and aggression that characterized Wehrmacht operations early in the war are gone, burned away in the Normandy bocage and the Falaise killing ground. French civilians caught in the pocket suffer alongside German soldiers. Thousands of refugees fled toward German lines as Allied forces advanced, preferring German occupation to battle zones. They find themselves trapped when the pocket closes. Some die in the air and artillery bombardments. Others survive to face difficult questions about why they were in German-controlled territory. In post-war France will not be kind to those suspected of collaboration. Many refugees in the pocket face decades of suspicion and social ostracism. Their presence in the pocket becomes evidence of collaboration, regardless of actual circumstances. The battle's aftermath is complicated by these civilian casualties and the political implications of French citizens found among retreating German forces. The Falaise pocket marks the effective end of German organized resistance in northern France. The divisions destroyed there represented the last significant German mobile forces west of the Seine River. After Falaise, German strategy shifts from counterattack to retreat. The question becomes whether German forces can establish a defensive line before Allied forces catch them. The race to the German border begins. But the race is already decided by Falaise. German forces lack the mobility to retreat faster than Allied forces can pursue. They lack the strength to hold defensive lines long enough for other units to escape. The campaign becomes a pursuit, with German forces trying to stay ahead of Allied armor, while Allied forces try to cut off and destroy German formations before they reach safety. Falaise demonstrates what happens when military forces are caught in the open without mobility or air cover against enemies with both. It is a lesson German commanders understand, but can do nothing to prevent from repeating. September 1st, 1944. Luxembourg. An American tank commander watches his fuel gauge drop to empty. His Sherman coughs once, twice, then falls silent. The engine is fine. The crew is fine. The ammunition is loaded. They are 30 yards inside Luxembourg, the first American forces to reach this country since its liberation began. They are also 30 yards from the German border, closer to Germany than any Allied forces since D-Day. And they are out of fuel. The tank will sit here for 3 days before fuel trucks arrive. By then, German forces will have improved their defensive positions on the German frontier. The gap that existed on September 1st will close. The opportunity to pursue defeated German forces into Germany itself will pass. The Great Allied advance across France, which covered 400 miles in 4 weeks, stops not because of German resistance, but because the laws of logistics cannot be violated even by victorious armies. The numbers are simple and unforgiving. An American armored division at full operational tempo consumes approximately 50,000 gallons of gasoline per day. The Third Army has approximately 15 divisions. Total daily fuel consumption, 750,000 gallons. The Red Ball Express, the truck convoy system supplying Allied forces, is operating at maximum capacity. 6,000 trucks drive continuous circuits from Normandy beaches to forward fuel dumps. Each truck carries about 500 gallons. In theory, if every truck makes one complete circuit per day, they can deliver 3 million gallons. In practice, many trucks break down. Round-trip distances now exceed 800 miles. Drivers rest occasionally. Actual daily delivery is perhaps 1 million gallons on good days, less on bad days. The shortfall is 500,000 gallons daily. And the gap is widening as Allied forces advance further from the beaches. Patton receives notification on September 1st that his fuel allocation is being cut from 393,000 gallons per day to 32,000 gallons per day. He explodes in fury, raging at Eisenhower's headquarters that he could end the war in weeks if only given the fuel. His protests accomplish nothing. The fuel does not exist to give him. Eisenhower faces an impossible choice. He can fully supply one army group, allowing it to continue rapid advance while other armies sit idle. Or he can distribute scarce fuel equally, allowing all armies to advance slowly. He chooses the latter, the broad front approach, and reasoning that maintaining pressure across the entire German frontier prevents Germany from concentrating reserves against a single thrust. This decision will be debated for decades. Did Eisenhower's caution prolong the war? Would a single concentrated thrust, fully supplied, have reached Berlin before winter? Montgomery argues for a northern thrust under his command. Give me the fuel and supplies, he insists, and I will take the Ruhr industrial region and Berlin. Patton argues for a southern thrust under his command. Give me the fuel and supplies, he counters, and I will drive through Frankfurt to Prague. Both men believe, with absolute certainty, that they can end the war in 1944 if only given priority. Eisenhower, pressured from both directions, satisfies neither, as he allocates resources to maintain both advances at reduced pace. Both Montgomery and Patton feel betrayed. Neither understands or admits understanding that Eisenhower has no resources to give. The constraints are not political or strategic. They are purely logistical. No amount of command emphasis can create fuel that must be physically transported from ports 400 miles away. The root cause of the fuel crisis lies not in supply, but in ports. The Allies are still using Cherbourg and small Normandy ports to land supplies. Cherbourg is 250 miles from Paris, 450 miles from Luxembourg. Every gallon of fuel must be trucked these distances. The longer the supply line, the more fuel is consumed just transporting fuel. A truck carrying 500 gallons to Luxembourg burns 50 gallons making the round trip. 10% of cargo is consumed in transportation. This percentage increases as distances increase. Beyond certain distances, truck transport becomes self-defeating. Fuel is consumed faster than it can be delivered. The solution is obvious. The Allies need a major port closer to the front lines. They captured one on September 3rd. They will not be able to use it until November 28th. Antwerp, captured intact on September 3rd by British forces, is Europe's largest port. Its facilities can handle 40,000 tons of cargo per day, more than all the Normandy ports combined. It has rail connections to every part of Germany. It is 90 miles from the Ruhr industrial region. That Antwerp could solve every Allied supply problem if only it were operational. But there is a problem. Antwerp sits on the Scheldt estuary, 70 miles from the sea. The estuary remains in German hands. Until Allied forces clear the estuary and the approaches to Antwerp, the port is useless. Ships cannot reach it, and clearing the estuary is not a priority. Montgomery is focused on Operation Market Garden, his plan to seize bridges across the Rhine. Eisenhower does not overrule this priority. Opening Antwerp is delayed. The delay proves catastrophic. From September 3rd, when Antwerp is captured, to November 28th, when the first convoy enters the port, 85 days pass. During those 85 days, Allied armies sit on the German border, unable to advance for lack of supplies. German forces use those 85 days to reconstruct their defensive line, bring up reinforcements, and prepare for the Allied onslaught. The breathing space allows Germany to continue the war into 1945. If Antwerp had been opened in mid-September, if supplies had begun flowing in October, Allied forces might have broken through the German border defenses before winter. Instead, They attack piecemeal, each army conducting independent operations without the logistical support to sustain offensive momentum. The broad front becomes a stalled front. The war that might have ended in autumn continues through winter and into spring. The Red Ball Express itself deserves recognition as one of the war's remarkable improvisations. 75% of the drivers are African American soldiers, mostly from quartermaster truck companies. These units, relegated to rear echelon roles because of military segregation, find themselves in the most critical position of the campaign. The trucks drive day and night, often without sleep, over roads destroyed by military traffic. Drivers navigate by dead reckoning, often without maps, sometimes without functioning headlights. German stragglers and bypassed units attack convoys. Drivers go armed, defending their trucks when necessary. Trucks break down constantly. The Express operates its own mobile repair units, cannibalizing disabled vehicles to keep others running. By September, the Express is losing 1,500 trucks per week to mechanical failure. Production cannot replace losses. The system is eating itself. Patton, denied fuel for rapid advance, Mays begins planning the campaign he can conduct with available resources. He shifts from exploitation to deliberate attack. Instead of racing deep into Germany, he prepares to fight through the Siegfried Line, the German border fortifications. This is exactly the kind of attritional warfare he hoped to avoid. The Siegfried Line, also called the West Wall, consists of bunkers, anti-tank obstacles, and minefields stretching along the entire German western border. It has been neglected since Germany expected never to need it, but German troops have been improving positions since early September. By the time Patton's forces attack, the West Wall has become a genuine obstacle. What might have been a pursuit into Germany becomes a siege of the German frontier. The opportunity created by the breakout from Normandy and the victory at Falaise dissolves in the mathematics of fuel consumption and port capacity. German commanders watch Allied supply problems with relief and growing confidence. In August, they faced catastrophe. Their armies were broken, their units scattered, their equipment lost. They expected Allied forces to pursue immediately into Germany, attacking before defenses could be organized. Instead, Allied forces halt at the border. German forces gain weeks to retreat, reorganize, and prepare. 100,000 replacements reach the Western Front in September. German industry, despite Allied bombing, produces tanks and artillery sufficient to re-equip shattered divisions. By October, German forces holding the West Wall number approximately equal to Allied forces attacking it. The material advantage the Allies enjoyed in France has been partially negated. The attacking forces are tired from months of continuous combat. The defending forces are fresh, fighting for their homeland, positioned in fortifications. The campaign's momentum has reversed. On September 11th, American forces reach the first Siegfried Line bunkers. The pursuit is over. The battle for Germany is about to begin. And it will look nothing like the race across France. It will be slow, costly, attritional warfare against prepared defenses in unfavorable weather. The great opportunity of summer 1944 has passed. The quick victory that seemed possible in August is no longer achievable by autumn. The war will continue through winter. Hundreds of thousands more will die, on both sides. Not because ports were not opened and fuel did not flow when it mattered most. This is the true cost of the supply crisis. Not just the miles not advanced or the battles not fought, but the battles that will have to be fought later, under worse conditions, at higher cost. The Red Ball Express did everything possible. It was not enough, and the war went on. September the 17th, 1944, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The sky above Holland, the greatest airborne armada in history, fills the sky. 1,500 transport aircraft, 478 gliders, 1,400 Allied fighters providing escort. Inside the transports, 34,600 paratroopers prepare to jump. They are the spearhead of Operation Market Garden, Montgomery's plan to end the war by Christmas. The objective is ambitious: seize bridges across multiple rivers in Holland, creating a corridor for Allied armor to race 60 miles into Germany, crossing the Rhine at Arnhem. If successful, Market Garden will bypass the Siegfried Line, outflank German defenses, and position Allied forces to strike into the industrial Ruhr region. Success means the war ends in 1944. Failure means the war continues. The paratroopers do not yet know that failure has already been determined by decisions made before the first parachute opens. The plan is complex almost to the point of guaranteed failure. American paratroopers will seize bridges at Eindhoven and Nijmegen. British paratroopers will seize the bridge at Arnhem. British armored forces will advance up a single road, linking the captured bridges in sequence. The corridor is 60 miles long and, in places, barely wide enough for 2 tanks abreast. Any bridge not captured, any significant German resistance on the road, any delay in the armored advance, and the entire operation fails. The plan requires everything to work perfectly. In war, nothing works perfectly. The planners know this. They proceed anyway because Montgomery has convinced them that German forces in Holland are weak, demoralized, and incapable of effective resistance. He is catastrophically wrong. 2 SS Panzer divisions are refitting near Arnhem. The evidence is clear and ignored. Dutch resistance fighters send messages to Allied intelligence. They report seeing tanks near Arnhem. They provide locations, unit identifications, and estimates of strength. Allied intelligence dismisses these reports. The tanks they assess, it must be disabled vehicles being sent for repair. RAF reconnaissance aircraft photographed the Arnhem area days before the operation. The photographs clearly show tanks hidden under camouflage. An intelligence officer at Montgomery's headquarters sees the photographs and raises concerns. He is told not to worry. Even if there are tanks, they are surely unfit for combat. This is wishful thinking raised to the level of operational planning. The tanks are real. They belong to the 9th and 10th SS Panzer divisions, pulled back from Normandy to refit. They are at reduced strength but perfectly capable of fighting. They will destroy the British airborne forces at Arnhem. The airborne assault begins at 1 o'clock. American paratroopers land at Eindhoven and Nijmegen. British paratroopers land near Arnhem. The drops are scattered, even as airborne drops always are, but most units assemble quickly. The Americans seize their bridges at Eindhoven and Nijmegen after brief fighting. The British, landing 6 to 8 miles from the Arnhem Bridge rather than directly on their objective, face a longer approach march. This distance was deliberate. Planners feared landing near the bridge would expose transports to heavy anti-aircraft fire. They chose to land in fields further away, where flak was lighter. This decision dooms the operation. The extra miles give German forces time to react, time to organize, time to position armor between the paratroopers and their objective. Only 1 battalion reaches the Arnhem Bridge intact. Lieutenant Colonel John Frost leads 2nd Battalion, 1st Parachute Brigade, to the northern end of the Arnhem Bridge. The 740 men reach the bridge and establish positions in nearby buildings. They expect British armored forces to arrive within 48 hours. They expect the rest of their brigade to join them shortly. Neither happens. German forces destroy most of the brigade during its approach march. British armor is delayed at Nijmegen, 10 miles south, unable to break through German defenses. Frost's battalion is alone, surrounded by increasing numbers of German troops in armor. They will hold the bridge for 4 days against impossible odds before being overrun. Of 740 men who reach the bridge, 81 will survive to surrender. The rest are killed or too wounded to move. The battle for Arnhem Bridge becomes legendary. Frost's men fight from houses overlooking the bridge, preventing German forces from using it. SS troops attack with infantry, tanks, and self-propelled guns. The British defenders have only small arms, anti-tank rockets, and a few light mortars. They fight from rubble as German fire systematically destroys every building they occupy. They run out of ammunition and take weapons from dead Germans. They run out of medical supplies and perform surgery with kitchen knives. Radio communications fail, leaving them unable to coordinate with higher headquarters or call artillery support. They fight on because surrender is not considered. On September 21st, the 4th day, German forces bring up heavy artillery and methodically flatten the remaining British positions. Frost, wounded, is captured. The survivors surrender. The bridge is lost. While Frost's battalion fights at Arnhem, the British armored forces struggle to break through at Nijmegen. the single road designated for the advance, quickly nicknamed Hell's Highway, becomes a death trap. German forces cannot stop the British advance entirely, but they can attack the flanks, cut the road, and create delays. Every delay means more time for German forces to contain the Arnhem airborne troops. Every hour that British armor spends fighting at Nijmegen is another hour Frost's battalion must hold without support. The armor finally breaks through on September 20th, 3 days late. They advance toward Arnhem, they never reach it. German forces establish blocking positions south of the city. British and Polish paratroopers, attempting to reinforce the Arnhem positions, are slaughtered crossing the Rhine. The operation has failed. The question becomes how many of the 10,600 British airborne troops at Arnhem can be evacuated. On the night of September 25th, British forces attempt to withdraw across the Rhine. Of the 10,600 troops who landed, approximately 2,400 escape. The rest are dead or captured. The exact numbers remain uncertain. German forces take 6,400 prisoners. Estimated dead number, at least 1,500, though many bodies are never recovered. The British 1st Airborne Division has effectively ceased to exist. It will not return to combat in World War II. The division's destruction for no strategic gain shocks the Allied command. Market Garden has not just failed, it has produced one of the British Army's worst defeats of the entire war. And it happened because commanders ignored intelligence, dismissed warnings, and proceeded with a plan that required perfection in circumstances that guaranteed chaos. The recriminations begin immediately. Montgomery blames everyone except himself. The airborne troops fought magnificently, but were let down by ground forces. The ground forces faced unexpectedly strong resistance. The weather prevented adequate air support. Every excuse is partially true and totally misleading. Market Garden failed because it was doomed from conception. A single road advance, easily cut through 60 miles of enemy territory, against forces stronger than expected, with inadequate contingency planning, was always likely to fail. Intelligence about German strength was available and ignored. The plan proceeded because Montgomery wanted a dramatic success, because pressures existed to end the war quickly, because admitting the plan was too risky meant abandoning the attempt entirely. So, the attempt went forward, and 10,000 British paratroopers paid the price. The strategic consequences of Market Garden extend beyond the immediate casualties. Eisenhower has devoted significant resources to Montgomery's operation. Resources that might have opened Antwerp have instead supported Market Garden. The delay in opening Antwerp, already discussed, is partly attributable to Market Garden drawing away units and supplies that should have cleared the Scheldt estuary. The operation consumes vast quantities of fuel and ammunition, quantities that could have supported advances elsewhere, and the failure convinces German commanders that Allied offensives can be defeated. German morale, all shaken by defeats in France, recovers. The invincible Allies are not invincible. They can be stopped. This realization stiffens German resistance in subsequent battles. Market Garden's failure echoes through the autumn and winter campaigns, prolonging a war that might have been shortened. The human stories of Market Garden are tales of courage wasted by poor planning, paratroopers fighting to the last bullet in Arnhem houses, Polish troops attempting daylight crossings of the Rhine under fire, glider pilots shot down before landing, Dutch civilians sheltering British wounded despite risk of German reprisal. The fighting demonstrates that Allied soldiers can match German soldiers in skill and determination, but skill and determination cannot overcome operational-level failures. When the plan is flawed, when intelligence is ignored, that when assumptions replace analysis, courage becomes sacrifice without purpose. The soldiers at Arnhem did everything asked of them. They deserve better from their commanders. They deserved a plan that might have succeeded. Instead, they got a bridge too far, a gamble that failed, a defeat that should have been avoided. And the war went on. September 19th, 1944. Hürtgen Forest, Germany. The 9th Infantry Division enters the forest expecting to clear it in days. The trees are dense, mostly fir and pine, growing on steep hillsides cut by ravines. The forest covers approximately 50 square miles along the German-Belgian border. American commanders view it as an obstacle to be eliminated, a pocket of resistance to be cleared before continuing the advance into Germany. They do not understand that they are entering terrain that will consume entire divisions, that will produce casualty rates exceeding D-Day, that will become known as the worst place to fight in the entire European theater. The forest appears on maps as a green patch between important objectives. In reality, it is about to become a graveyard where American infantry will die in numbers that shock even veteran commanders. And the truly terrible part is that none of it matters strategically. The entire battle could have been avoided. The terrain makes conventional tactics impossible. Trees grow so thick that visibility is measured in yards rather than hundreds of yards. Artillery forward observers cannot see targets. Tank commanders cannot identify enemy positions until they are on top of them. And infantry advances become isolated squad actions where coordination breaks down within minutes. German defenders exploit every advantage. They position machine guns to cover the few trails through the forest. They pre-register mortars on every likely approach. They dig bunkers so well camouflaged that American troops walk past them without noticing until fire erupts from behind. The forest negates American advantages in armor, artillery, and air support. It reduces warfare to infantry versus infantry in the worst possible conditions. And the Americans keep attacking because no one wants to admit the objective is not worth the cost. The weather makes everything worse. September brings rain, turning the forest floor into mud. October brings more rain and early snow. November brings freezing rain that coats everything in ice. It as soldiers cannot dig proper foxholes in the frozen ground. They huddle in shallow scrapes, soaked through, shivering through nights that seem endless. Trench foot becomes epidemic. Men's feet freeze in wet boots. The flesh dies. Toes turn black. Entire platoons are evacuated for medical treatment, not from combat wounds, but from exposure injuries. By December, the 9th Infantry Division reports 2,000 non-battle casualties per week from trench foot alone. This is equivalent to losing an entire regiment every 2 weeks, without the enemy firing a shot. The forest is killing American soldiers as efficiently as German defenders. Tree-burst artillery transforms defensive firepower. When shells explode in the air after hitting tree branches, they create a lethal rain of shrapnel and wooden splinters. A normal artillery barrage in open terrain produces casualties in a predictable radius around each burst. Tree-burst artillery increases the lethal radius threefold. Troops cannot dig deep enough to escape overhead bursts. Foxholes that would provide safety in open terrain become death traps when shells explode in the canopy above. German defenders understand this and employ artillery liberally. Every American advance meets not just machine gun fire, but carefully plotted artillery barrages. The combination makes movement suicidal, and remaining stationary nearly as dangerous. Infantry learns to dread the whistle of incoming rounds, knowing they cannot take adequate cover. The battle for Schmidt becomes emblematic of the entire Hurtgen nightmare. Schmidt is a small German village on a hilltop at the edge of the forest, and capturing it would straighten the American line and provide observation over surrounding terrain. The 28th Infantry Division receives orders to take Schmidt in early November. The division advances through the forest, fighting for every yard. They reach Schmidt on November 2nd after days of brutal combat. Then the 6th SS Mountain Division counterattacks. The SS troops are specialists in mountain and forest warfare. They infiltrate American positions, attack from unexpected directions, and cut off the units in Schmidt from their supply lines. Within 48 hours, the situation becomes desperate. American troops in Schmidt are surrounded, out of ammunition, taking heavy casualties. The division commander orders retreat. The withdrawal turns into rout as German forces pursue through the forest. You see, the 28th Infantry Division suffers 6,184 casualties in 8 days. Schmidt is back in German hands. Nothing has been accomplished except adding names to the casualty lists. The pattern repeats throughout the autumn. The 9th Infantry Division attacks, suffers 4,500 casualties, gains perhaps 2 miles. It is withdrawn and replaced by the 28th Infantry Division. The 28th attack suffers 6,000 casualties, gains perhaps 1 mile. It is withdrawn and replaced by the 4th Infantry Division. The 4th attacks, suffers 5,000 casualties, gains perhaps another mile. By December, 3 American divisions have been fed into the Hurtgen forest. All 3 have been rendered combat ineffective. The total advance is approximately 7 miles. The casualty total is approximately 15,500, but these numbers understate the true cost. Combat exhaustion cases, men who simply break down psychologically, number in the thousands more. Units supposedly at full strength consist of replacements who lack training and cohesion. Veteran infantry, the backbone of any army, have been consumed in a forest that could have been bypassed entirely. Ernest Hemingway, covering the 22nd Infantry Regiment as a war correspondent, writes that men died in Hurtgen Forest like men never died before. He compares it to Passchendaele, the notorious World War I battle remembered for achieving nothing at catastrophic cost. The comparison is apt. Like Passchendaele, and Hurtgen is an attritional battle fought not because the objective matters, but because commanders cannot admit it does not matter. The original rationale for attacking through the forest was to protect the flank of forces advancing further north. But those forces have halted. The flank they were protecting no longer needs protection. Yet the attacks continue because stopping would require admitting that thousands have died for nothing. So, more thousands are sent in. The institutional momentum of military operations overrides strategic logic. The battle feeds on itself, justifying its continuation by the sacrifices already made. German defenders understand they are winning a strategic victory in Hurtgen. They cannot defeat American armies in open terrain. They lack the mobility and resources for counteroffensives. But in the forest, they can impose casualties disproportionate to their own losses. Every American division that breaks itself in Hurtgen is a division unavailable elsewhere. Every week the Americans waste in the forest is another week for German forces to prepare for the coming winter offensive in the Ardennes. German commanders feed replacements into Hurtgen just as Americans do, accepting casualties as the price of forcing Americans to accept greater casualties. It is attritional warfare in its purest and most terrible form. Both sides feed men into a meat grinder, and the side that can afford greater losses eventually wins. But victory in Hurtgen means only that you have lost less than your opponent. There is no ground gained that matters, no strategic objective achieved, no ending except exhaustion. American junior officers and NCOs bear the brunt of Hurtgen casualties. German tactics prioritize killing leaders. Snipers target anyone who appears to be giving orders. Machine gun teams shift fire to anyone who stands up or gestures. Officers learn to carry rifles instead of pistols, to remove rank insignia, to avoid any action that might identify them as leaders. But combat requires someone to give orders, to coordinate movement, to make decisions under fire. Those who fulfill these roles die at disproportionate rates. Companies commanded by lieutenants become companies commanded by sergeants. Platoons led by sergeants devolve to squads led by corporals or senior privates. Units lose not just numbers, but capability as experienced leaders are killed and replaced by soldiers promoted beyond their training. The institutional knowledge of how to fight effectively is bled away in the forest. By late November, even the commanders ordering Hurtgen attacks begin questioning their own decisions. After-action reports describe the forest as unsuitable for offensive operations. Recommendations state that future operations should bypass such terrain rather than attacking through it. But these recommendations come too late for the divisions already destroyed. The lessons are learned through blood. American forces will not repeat the mistake of attacking through forests against prepared defenses. But this is cold comfort to the soldiers killed learning the lesson. Hurtgen becomes a cautionary tale, an example of how not to conduct operations, a battle remembered primarily for its futility. And yet, even as American divisions bleed in the forest, the German forces are preparing something far more dangerous. They are concentrating armor in the nearby Ardennes, preparing for an offensive that will dwarf Hurtgen in scale and shock. The attention focused on the forest prevents American intelligence from noticing the buildup. In this sense, Hurtgen achieves a German strategic objective, but not through German brilliance. It succeeds through American fixation on an objective that never mattered. The Hurtgen forest battle finally ends in mid-December, when German forces abandon the forest to participate in the Ardennes offensive. American troops occupy the ground they have paid so dearly to win. They find the bunkers and positions that caused so many casualties. They find the pre-registered artillery coordinates that made every approach a killing ground. They find evidence that German defenders were often outnumbered and outgunned, but prevailed through superior use of terrain. And they find nothing in the forest worth the cost of taking it. No vital roads, no crucial supply dumps, no strategic positions. Just trees and mud and the graves of American soldiers. The battle that should never have been fought is over. The divisions that fought it will need months to recover. Some will never be as effective as they were before entering the forest. And the men who survived will carry memories of Hurtgen for the rest of their lives. Memories of friends lost for objectives that did not matter. Of courage expended without purpose. Of a battle that epitomizes the waste and futility of war. October the 2nd, 1944. Woensdrecht, Holland. Canadian infantry approach a causeway barely 200 yards wide. On either side, flooded polders stretch to the horizon. The water is brackish, contaminated with seawater, deep enough to drown a man. There is no cover on the causeway, no possibility of flanking maneuver. The only way forward is straight ahead into German machine gun fire. The Black Watch of Canada receives orders to attack. 325 men advance across the causeway. German machine guns open fire from prepared positions. The Canadians cannot deploy off the causeway because of the water. They cannot take cover because there is no cover. They can only advance or die. 145 become casualties in a single day. They gain 200 yards. Tomorrow, they will attack again. This is the Scheldt campaign, the forgotten battle that mattered more than most operations that received headlines. The strategic situation is absurd and infuriating. British forces captured Antwerp intact on September 3rd. The port facilities are undamaged, capable of handling 40,000 tons of cargo per day. But Antwerp sits 70 miles from the sea at the end of the Scheldt estuary. The estuary remains in German hands. German troops occupy both banks and the islands in the waterway. Until the estuary is cleared, ships cannot reach Antwerp. Until ships can reach Antwerp, the port is useless. The Allies have captured the greatest port in Europe and cannot use it. Meanwhile, their armies sit on the German border, unable to advance for lack of supplies. The solution is obvious. Clear the Scheldt, open Antwerp, resume in offensive operations. Yet for an entire month after capturing Antwerp, the Allies do nothing about the estuary. Market Garden takes priority. Opening Antwerp is delayed. On October 2nd, after Market Garden fails, Canadian forces finally begin the Scheldt campaign. They face German 15th Army, approximately 85,000 troops holding a defensive line along the estuary. The Germans have flooded large areas by opening dikes, turning the landscape into a nightmare of water, mud, and isolated islands of dry ground. The Canadians must attack across flooded polders where the only routes are narrow causeways and dikes. German defenders can see every approach. They have established killing zones covering every possible avenue of attack. Machine guns, mortars, and artillery are pre-registered on every causeway and dike. The terrain negates Canadian advantages in armor and numbers. Infantry must attack in narrow columns, unable to deploy, unable to use supporting weapons effectively. It is Hurtgen forest, except with water instead of trees, and casualties mount just as rapidly. The battle for Woensdrecht becomes a week-long nightmare. The causeway must be taken to advance further into the Scheldt. Canadian infantry attack repeatedly. Each attack suffers heavy casualties. Each attack gains a few hundred yards. German counterattacks retake ground at night. On October 13th, the Black Watch of Canada attacks again. They advance under artillery fire and machine gun fire across open ground. The regimental history later records the attack as the worst day in the regiment's history. Of 325 men who attack, and 145 are casualties. The survivors reach their objective and hold it, but the cost shocks even hardened commanders. Canadian infantry cannot sustain such losses indefinitely. Yet the attack must continue because Antwerp must be opened. The mathematics are cruel but inescapable. Casualties now enable operations later. The question is whether the Canadians can sustain the campaign long enough to reach their objective. On November 1st, British commandos assault Walcheren Island, the key to controlling the Scheldt estuary. The island has been fortified by Germans as a crucial defensive position. British planners decide the only way to breach its defenses is to flood it. The RAF bombs the dikes surrounding the island, allowing seawater to pour through gaps 4,000 yards wide. The bombing kills over 200 Dutch civilians and destroys hundreds of farms. The flooding makes the island nearly impossible to defend, but also nearly impossible to attack. British commandos must assault through the breaches in amphibious vehicles, landing under fire in flooded terrain. German defenders fight from the few remaining dry positions. The battle for Walcheren becomes a series of small unit actions, commandos clearing bunkers and strong points one at a time, often in water up to their waists. The island is not fully secured until November 8th, 5 weeks after the Scheldt campaign began. Canadian casualties in the Scheldt campaign total 6,367, killed and wounded over 5 weeks. This is comparable to Canadian casualties at Falaise, but receives a fraction of the attention. The fighting is brutal, unglamorous infantry combat in terrible terrain against determined defenders. There are no dramatic breakthroughs, no races across country, no liberation of major cities. Just slow, grinding advances across flooded polders and fortified islands. The war correspondents are elsewhere, covering more dramatic stories. The public barely knows the battle is happening. Canadian soldiers fight and die in obscurity while their efforts make possible everything that follows. Without Antwerp, Allied armies cannot advance. Without clearing the Scheldt, Antwerp cannot open. The causeway at Woensdrecht, where the Black Watch bled, matters more strategically than most battles that made headlines. The first Allied convoy enters Antwerp on November 28th, 85 days after the port was captured. The delay has cost the Allies whatever chance they had to end the war in 1944. But now, finally, supplies can flow to forward units in quantities sufficient to sustain offensive operations. Antwerp's capacity of 40,000 tons per day exceeds all other Allied ports combined. Fuel, ammunition, food, and equipment pour into the port and onto trains heading for the front. The logistics crisis that halted the Allied advance in September eases. Armies that were immobilized for lack of supply begin planning winter offensives. Antwerp proves its worth immediately. When the German Ardennes offensive begins in mid-December, Allied forces have the supply reserves to respond quickly and effectively. Without Antwerp, the Battle of the Bulge might have succeeded. The Scheldt campaign made the Allied response possible. The Dutch civilians caught in the Scheldt campaign suffer terribly. Thousands are evacuated from combat zones. Others remain in their homes, trapped between Allied and German forces. The flooding destroys agricultural land that will take years to reclaim. Farms that have been productive for centuries are ruined by saltwater inundation. The bombing of the Walcheren dikes, militarily necessary but agriculturally catastrophic, poisons soil with salt. After the war, Dutch engineers will spend years pumping out the flooded land and leaching salt from contaminated soil. The economic damage to the region is immense. Yet the Dutch generally support the Allied actions, understanding that liberation requires destroying what occupiers have fortified. The contrast with French complaints about damage in Normandy is notable. Dutch civilians, after 4 years of occupation, are willing to accept destruction as the price of freedom. The strategic importance of Antwerp extends beyond logistics. The port gives Allies a base close enough to the Ruhr industrial region to threaten Germany's war production directly. V-2 rockets are launched against Antwerp throughout the winter, killing hundreds of civilians. Because Germany recognizes how crucial the port is to Allied operations, Hitler orders continuous rocket bombardment, trying to disrupt port operations and demoralize Belgian workers. The bombardment fails to significantly affect port capacity, but demonstrates German understanding of Antwerp's importance. If Germany had held the Scheldt estuary longer, if opening Antwerp had been delayed further, the entire Allied winter campaign would have been impossible. In this sense, the Canadian infantry who died on the causeways and the British commandos who assaulted Walcheren Island shortened the war more effectively than many more famous battles. The Scheldt campaign reveals a persistent Allied weakness in prioritizing logistics. Throughout the fall of 1944, Allied commanders focus on dramatic operational objectives. market gardens, bridges. Patton's drives toward the Rhine, while neglecting the unglamorous work of opening ports and building supply infrastructure. Montgomery wants to seize a bridge too far. Patton wants to race to Prague. Eisenhower tries to satisfy both. No one prioritizes opening Antwerp until Market Garden fails and supply shortages become critical. The delay costs months. If opening Antwerp had been the top priority immediately after its capture in early September, then if the Scheldt had been cleared in September rather than October and November, Allied forces might have crossed the Rhine before winter. Instead, they spend the autumn fighting battles they cannot sustain logistically, and clearing terrain they should have cleared a month earlier. The forgotten Battle of the Scheldt ultimately achieves what it was meant to achieve. Antwerp opens, supplies flow, Allied armies resume offensive operations. But the cost in Canadian casualties and the delay in opening the port represent missed opportunities. The soldiers who fought at Woensdrecht and Walcheren deserve recognition they rarely receive. They fought the necessary battle, the battle that enabled everything else, in terrible conditions against skilled defenders. Their victory was measured not in miles advanced or cities liberated, but in tons of supplies delivered through an opened port. It is an unglamorous metric for an unglamorous campaign. But in war, logistics matter as much as tactics, and the men who make logistics possible are as essential as those who win headline battles. The Scheldt campaign was the other D-Day, the operation that made Allied victory in Europe possible. History should remember it as such. August 1944. Roads leading east from Falaise. German survivors straggle toward Germany in small groups. They are filthy, exhausted, often wounded. They have abandoned their heavy weapons, their vehicles, everything except what they can carry. Some march in formation, maintaining military discipline despite circumstances. Others simply walk, alone or in pairs, hoping to reach German lines before being captured or killed by French resistance. Allied intelligence estimates that approximately 300,000 German soldiers escaped from France in August and September. These men no longer represent combat-effective units. They are scattered individuals, separated from their formations, lacking equipment and organization. Any conventional military analysis suggests Germany cannot rebuild effective fighting forces from these remnants in less than 6 months. The analysis is wrong. Germany will have 15 new divisions ready for combat within 3 months. The Ghost Army will reform faster than anyone believes possible. The recovery begins with brutal simplicity. German military police set up collection points along roads leading into Germany. Every soldier passing through is documented, or assigned to a replacement unit and sent to training camps. There is no leave, no rest period, no time to recover from trauma. You survived France, the message goes. Now you will fight for Germany. The survivors are formed into Volksgrenadier divisions, People's Infantry divisions, a name that acknowledges these are not the elite formations of earlier war years. The soldiers are a mixture of survivors from destroyed units, recovered wounded from hospitals, and young conscripts from the 1926 and 1927 birth years. They receive 6 weeks of training. Equipment is issued from factories working at maximum capacity despite Allied bombing. By November, 15 Volksgrenadier divisions are combat-ready. They are not equivalent to the divisions destroyed in France, but they are adequate for defensive warfare. And Germany's strategy has shifted from offensive to defensive. On October 18th, Hitler issues an order creating the Volkssturm, the People's Storm. Every male between ages 16 and 60 who is not already in military service is conscripted for homeland defense. The Volkssturm will eventually number approximately 6 million men, though most never receive weapons or training. They are intended as a last-ditch defense force, militia for protecting German cities against invasion. The creation of Volkssturm reveals Hitler's delusion and determination simultaneously. He is preparing Germany for total war when Germany has already lost. Yet the Volkssturm will fight, particularly in eastern Germany against Soviet forces. Poorly trained teenagers and grandfathers with obsolete rifles will contest every street in Berlin. The fanaticism induced by Nazi indoctrination proves more durable than military capability. Germany can create millions of soldiers even after its armies are destroyed. Whether those soldiers can fight effectively is secondary to the fact that they will fight. German industry performs miracles of production despite Allied bombing. Tank production in December 1944 reaches 1,854 units, the highest monthly production of the entire war. This is achieved despite the destruction of synthetic fuel plants, despite the bombing of ball-bearing factories, despite the disruption of rail networks. German industry has dispersed production to underground facilities built with slave labor. The Mittelwerk facility, built into a mountain, produces V-2 rockets using prisoners from Dora concentration camp. Over 20,000 prisoners die from starvation, beatings, and executions while building the facility and producing rockets. The moral cost of German war production in late 1944 is incalculable, but the production continues. Tanks, artillery, and ammunition reach German units throughout the autumn. The material basis for continued resistance exists because Germany is willing to work human beings to death to create it. The SS proves particularly effective at rebuilding shattered divisions. The 12th SS Panzer Division, nearly destroyed in Normandy and Falaise, is rebuilt to operational strength by November. Young recruits from the Hitler Youth fill the ranks. These teenagers have grown up under Nazi indoctrination. They believe in Hitler, in Germany's cause, in the necessity of fighting to the last. They lack the tactical skill of earlier SS formations, but compensate with fanaticism. They will fight harder, take greater risks, and accept higher casualties than more experienced troops who have learned caution. The rebuilt SS divisions become Germany's mobile reserve. The units Hitler will commit to the Ardennes offensive. Their effectiveness in the Bulge will shock American forces who expected Germans to be demoralized and defeated. Instead, they face enemies more determined than ever. German defensive advantages increase as Allied supply lines lengthen. German forces are falling back toward their own border, shortening their supply lines with every retreat. They are establishing positions on prepared fortifications like the Siegfried Line. They are fighting for their homeland, which provides psychological motivation that occupation duty cannot match. German commanders no longer need to worry about strategic maneuver or mobile warfare. They can concentrate on defense, the form of warfare where Germany's tactical excellence still matters. The Tiger and Panther tanks that struggled with fuel shortages and mechanical breakdowns during the retreat now operate closer to supply bases. German artillery, plentiful and well supplied with ammunition, can defend fixed positions effectively. The materiel disadvantage that doomed Germany and France matters less in the defensive battles along the border. The age composition of German forces reveals the desperation underlying the recovery. The average age of Wehrmacht soldiers increases from 27 years to 31 years between June and December 1944. Entire divisions consist of men in their mid-30s and early 40s, recalled from rear echelon units or recovered from wounds. These men lack the physical stamina of younger soldiers, but possess experience and steadiness under fire. Conversely, some units consist almost entirely of teenagers, boys 16 and 17 years old, who should be in school. These extremes, old men and boys, make up increasing percentages of German strength. The core of experienced, physically capable soldiers in their 20s has been depleted by years of war. Germany is scraping the bottom of its manpower barrel, but the bottom still yields millions of potential soldiers when the alternative is accepting defeat. Hitler's strategic concept for the rebuilt forces is offensive rather than defensive. Then he rejects suggestions from field commanders that Germany should establish a strong defensive line and force allies to attack at heavy cost. Instead, he plans a major counteroffensive in the Ardennes, the same region where Germany achieved breakthrough in 1940. The plan is operationally delusional. Germany lacks the fuel for sustained mobile operations. Germany lacks air superiority necessary for breakthrough. Germany lacks the strategic reserves to exploit even if breakthrough is achieved. Yet, Hitler insists. If the offensive succeeds, he argues, it will split the Allied armies, capture Antwerp, and force the Western Allies to negotiate peace. Then Germany can concentrate all forces against the Soviets. This fantasy drives German planning throughout the autumn. These resources that could strengthen defensive positions are instead concentrated for offensive operations. The rebuilt panzer divisions are not dispersed along the front, but held in secret reserve for the Ardennes attack. The German recovery in autumn 1944 demonstrates that destroying armies does not end wars unless you also destroy the capacity and will to rebuild those armies. Allied forces destroyed German armies in France. They captured hundreds of thousands of prisoners. They destroyed thousands of tanks and vehicles. Yet within 3 months, Germany fielded new armies. The prisoners cannot be replaced, but new soldiers can be conscripted. The tanks cannot be recovered, but new tanks can be produced. The organizational structures, the command systems, the doctrinal knowledge, all these intangibles survive defeat and enable rebuilding. Germany in late 1944 is materially weaker than Germany in June, but Germany retains the will to fight and the industrial capacity to equip fighters. This proves sufficient to prolong the war through another winter and into spring 1945. The human cost of German recovery is borne disproportionately by those least able to defend themselves: slave laborers in underground factories, teenagers conscripted into the Hitler Youth divisions, 40-year-old fathers pulled from families, 16-year-old boys given rifles and told to defend positions against tanks. German command is burning through Germany's future, consuming the young and exploiting the enslaved to gain a few more months of resistance. Yet there is no rational strategic calculus that justifies this. Germany cannot win. German generals know this. Many tell Hitler directly. He ignores them, relieves them, or has them arrested. The war continues not because victory is possible, but because Hitler refuses to accept defeat. And millions will die in the final months because one man's refusal to face reality becomes national policy enforced by terror. The Ghost Army reforms not because Germany can win, but because Germany cannot stop, and it will fight on until it is completely destroyed. December the 16th, 1944, 5:30 in the morning. The Ardennes Forest. American soldiers in forward positions hear a rumble like distant thunder. Then the sky erupts. Hundreds of German artillery pieces and rocket launchers open fire simultaneously across an 80-mile front. For 90 minutes, shells fall on American positions with an intensity unseen since the early days of Normandy. Soldiers huddle in foxholes while the earth heaves around them. Communications lines are cut. Observation posts are destroyed. Battalion headquarters are hit. When the bombardment finally stops, German infantry and armor emerge from the forest. 200,000 German troops, 500 tanks, attacking along a sector held by 83,000 Americans. The offensive that will become known as the Battle of the Bulge has begun. The Germans have achieved complete surprise. American intelligence failed to detect the massive buildup. The greatest American intelligence failure of the European War is about to produce the largest battle in American military history. The surprise is comprehensive and shocking, and ultra intercepts provided hints of German activity, but nothing suggesting major offensive. Allied intelligence assumed Germany lacked fuel and reserves for attacks. They believed German forces were demoralized after defeats in France. They thought the Ardennes sector, with its forests and poor roads, was unsuitable for armored operations. They were wrong on every count. Germany has concentrated its last mobile reserves for one final throw of the dice. The fuel exists because Germany has hoarded every available leader for this operation. German morale is sustained by the fact they are defending the fatherland and by Nazi propaganda promising miracle weapons. And the Ardennes, dismissed as tank country by Allied intelligence, is exactly where Germany achieved breakthrough in 1940. History repeats, first as tragedy, then as farce, then as tragedy again. The American forces hit by the initial assault are a mixture of green divisions and exhausted veterans. The 106th Infantry Division, in the line for only days, barely knows its positions when the attack comes. The 28th Infantry Division, shattered in Hürtgen Forest and supposedly resting in a quiet sector, faces the main German thrust. The 2nd Infantry Division is in the middle of its own attack when Germans hit its flanks. None of these units are prepared for what strikes them. German forces overrun forward positions before American troops can react. Some units retreat in disorder. Others hold isolated strongpoints, surrounded but fighting. By nightfall on December 16th, the situation is confused and deteriorating. that American commanders do not yet understand the scale of the German offensive. They think it is a local counterattack. They are catastrophically wrong. December the 17th brings clarification and horror. At Malmedy, SS troops massacre 84 American prisoners in a field. The prisoners are machine-gunned in cold blood, and those who survive the initial firing are shot individually as they lie wounded. News of the massacre spreads rapidly through American units. The message is clear: no quarter will be given. The rules of civilized warfare, already strained, collapse entirely. American soldiers begin refusing to take SS prisoners. Captured SS troops are shot. The battle takes on a vicious character, absent from earlier Western Front fighting. Simultaneously, American forces realize the German offensive is no local attack. The entire divisions are engaged. German armor is breaking through in multiple places. The situation is critical. Eisenhower, meeting with his commanders, reframes the crisis as opportunity. The present situation is to be regarded as one of opportunity for us, and not of disaster, he tells them. If the Germans are concentrating here, they are weak elsewhere. But first, the attack must be stopped. The critical position becomes Bastogne, a road junction where 7 highways converge. Whoever controls Bastogne controls movement through the Ardennes. German planners need these roads for their advance. The 101st Airborne Division, resting in France after Market Garden, receives emergency orders. Trucks transport them to Bastogne just ahead of German forces. 11,000 paratroopers arrive in the town on December 19th and immediately establish defensive positions. German forces surround them within 24 hours. For a week, the 101st Airborne will hold Bastogne against attacks by 45,000 German troops. The siege becomes legendary. On December 22nd, German commanders send a surrender demand. General Anthony McAuliffe responds with one word: nuts. The message is delivered to confused German officers who do not understand American slang. It means no, the Americans explain. We will not surrender. The Germans attack again. The Americans hold. While Bastogne becomes a symbol of American determination, the larger battle rages across the Ardennes. German forces achieve penetration of 60 miles in some sectors, creating the bulge that gives the battle its name. But the penetration is narrow, creating a salient vulnerable to counterattack from both flanks. And German forces are not reaching their objectives on schedule. The plan called for capturing Antwerp within a week. By December 20th, German spearheads are still 70 miles from Antwerp and running out of fuel. The German plan required capturing American fuel dumps to sustain the advance. Most of those dumps have been evacuated or destroyed. German armor, designed to race to the coast, is instead fighting for every mile. The weather, which initially grounded Allied aircraft and gave Germans freedom of movement, begins to clear. Allied fighter bombers return to action. German columns, exposed on narrow roads, become targets again. As Patton's response to the bulge demonstrates operational flexibility at its finest. His Third Army is attacking toward the Saar when the German offensive begins. Eisenhower orders Patton to disengage, turn 90 degrees north, and counterattack the German southern flank. Patton's staff has prepared contingency plans for exactly this scenario, anticipating that German forces might counterattack somewhere. Within 72 hours, Third Army has pivoted, moved over 100 miles through ice and snow, and begun attacking toward Bastogne. This maneuver, involving hundreds of thousands of troops and vehicles moving in winter conditions, is among the most impressive operational achievements of the war. On December 26th, tanks from the 4th Armored Division break through to Bastogne. The siege is lifted. Now the German offensive has reached its furthest extent and begun receding. The bulge is about to be squeezed closed. The battle continues through January as Allied forces compress the German salient from 3 sides. German forces fight desperately to hold ground or retreat in order. Some units escape, others are destroyed or captured. The final cost shocks both sides. American casualties total 89,000, including 19,000 killed. This is the bloodiest American battle of the European War, exceeding even Normandy's total. German casualties approximate 67,000, plus the loss of approximately 800 tanks and irreplaceable fuel reserves. Germany has spent its last mobile reserve, The panzer divisions committed to the Ardennes are destroyed or rendered combat ineffective. There will be no more German offensives in the west. The remaining campaign will be Allied advance and German retreat until surrender. The strategic consequences of the Bulge extend beyond casualties. German forces that might have defended the Rhine River were instead sacrificed in the Ardennes. The offensive delayed Allied advance by perhaps 6 weeks, but gained Germany nothing except those 6 weeks. A rational defense of the Rhine might have delayed Allies for months. Instead, Hitler gambled on achieving a dramatic victory that was never realistically possible. He lost the gamble and shortened the war rather than prolonging it. German soldiers who died in the Ardennes died for a plan that any objective analysis showed could not succeed. But Hitler did not permit objective analysis. He demanded offensive action and got it. As the offensive failed, Germany's position was weaker after the Bulge than before, and Allied forces, having weathered the shock, now prepared to advance into Germany itself, with the confidence that comes from defeating an enemy's best shot. The Bulge reveals both American military strengths and weaknesses. The weakness is intelligence. American forces were surprised, despite ample indicators that something was happening in the Ardennes. The strength is resilience. American forces, despite initial confusion and local defeats, responded quickly, reinforced threatened sectors, and counterattacked before German momentum could be consolidated. The contrast with French response to German breakthrough in 1940 is stark. French forces collapsed psychologically when their lines were penetrated. American forces bent but did not break. All individual units, surrounded and outnumbered, held key positions. Commanders at all levels adapted to fluid situations. The logistical system, tested by sudden emergency redeployments, performed adequately. American military culture, which emphasizes initiative and adaptation over rigid adherence to plans, proved superior to German culture, which required permission from higher authority for major decisions. The Bulge demonstrated that by late 1944, American forces had become truly professional. They could absorb shocks and respond effectively. They had learned how to fight and win, and they would prove this in the final advance into Germany, March 7, 1945, Remagen, Germany. Early afternoon, Lieutenant Karl Timmermann leads a platoon of the 9th Armored Division toward a bridge over the Rhine River. They expect to find the bridge destroyed. German engineers have prepared demolitions on every Rhine bridge, ready to blow them when Allied forces approach. Timmermann's men advance cautiously, expecting the explosion any moment. It does not come. They reach the western end of the Ludendorff Bridge and see it still standing. On the eastern end, German engineers are working frantically with detonators. Something has gone wrong. The charges are not firing properly. Timmermann makes a decision. His orders are to secure the western bank. He decides to cross. His men run across the bridge under fire. German machine guns shoot from the eastern towers. German artillery fires from surrounding hills. Halfway across, the bridge shudders. A partial explosion damages the structure, but does not drop it. Timmermann's men keep running. They reach the eastern bank. They have secured the first intact crossing of the Rhine, and they have changed the course of the war's final phase. Eisenhower, informed of the Remagen capture, orders, hold at all costs. Engineers rush to reinforce the bridge. Infantry divisions cross immediately, establishing a bridgehead on the eastern bank. German commanders order counterattacks. Hitler is furious, believing the bridge capture resulted from treason rather than German failure and American initiative. He orders the officers responsible executed, but recriminations cannot change facts. Americans are across the Rhine, 50 miles beyond where any Allied forces were supposed to be. The bridgehead expands daily. Within a week, 8,000 troops per day are crossing at Remagen. On March 17th, the damaged bridge finally collapses from accumulated structural strain. By then, engineers have constructed multiple pontoon bridges. The Rhine barrier has been breached. The final advance into Germany can begin. Operation Plunder, Montgomery's set-piece Rhine crossing, begins on March 22nd. If Remagen represents American improvisation and opportunism, Plunder represents British methodical preparation and overwhelming force. Montgomery masses 21,000 troops, thousands of artillery pieces, and hundreds of landing craft for the assault. The bombardment before the crossing lasts hours. Engineers have planned every detail. Commandos seize the far bank. Infantry cross in waves. By morning of March 23rd, British forces are established on the eastern bank with minimal casualties. The Rhine, the natural barrier protecting Germany's industrial heartland, has been crossed in two places. German forces cannot defend both crossings and the entire river line simultaneously. The defense of Germany west of the Rhine collapses. Allied forces surge forward. The end is approaching, visible now to everyone except Hitler. As Allied forces advance into Germany, they encounter horrors that redefine their understanding of the war. On April 11th, the 82nd Airborne Division liberates Buchenwald concentration camp. Soldiers who have seen the worst combat in Europe are shocked by what they find. Thousands of emaciated prisoners, barely alive, mass graves, crematoria, evidence of systematic murder on a scale beyond comprehension. Similar discoveries occur across Germany as camps are liberated. Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, Dora, that each reveals new dimensions of Nazi crimes. The soldiers who liberate these camps lose whatever sympathy they might have retained for German suffering. The German nation that created and operated these facilities forfeits any claim to mercy. The combat becomes, if possible, even more brutal. Quarter is rarely offered to SS troops. German civilians who claim ignorance are forced to tour nearby camps to see what was done in their name. The war's final phase loses any pretense of restraint. On April 25th, American and Soviet forces meet at Torgau on the Elbe River. The meeting is carefully staged for propaganda purposes. Soldiers from both armies shake hands, exchange souvenirs, and pose for photographs. The reality behind the symbolism is complex. The two armies represent fundamentally different political systems that will soon be enemies in the Cold War. But, for a moment, they are allies who have defeated Nazi Germany from opposite directions. The meeting at the Elbe also represents a strategic decision that will shape post-war Europe. American forces could have pushed to Berlin. They are closer than Soviet forces when the race begins. But Eisenhower decides not to make Berlin a target. The casualties for taking Berlin, he calculates, are not justified when Soviet forces will take it anyway based on Allied agreements. The decision to halt at the Elbe and let Soviets take Berlin is pragmatic but consequential. The division of Germany, of Berlin, of Europe itself follows from this decision. The final weeks of fighting produce casualties that, in retrospect, seem tragically unnecessary. Germany has obviously lost. Allied forces advance rapidly against collapsing resistance. Yet combat continues, producing approximately 135,000 Allied casualties from March through early May. German casualties are far higher, including massive prisoner totals as entire units surrender. The question haunts historians. Were these final casualties necessary? Could German surrender have been negotiated earlier, saving tens of thousands of lives on both sides? The answer is complex. Allied policy demands unconditional surrender. Hitler refuses to accept any terms. Until Hitler is dead or captured, surrender cannot happen. So fighting continues until the Nazi regime physically ceases to exist. The casualties of March, April, and May are the price of Allied insistence on unconditional surrender, combined with Nazi refusal to accept reality. German resistance in the final phase varies wildly. Some units surrender at first opportunity. Others fight to the last ammunition. Hitler Youth units, teenagers indoctrinated with Nazi ideology, defend positions with suicidal determination. Volkssturm militia, old men with obsolete rifles, contest street battles they cannot win. SS troops fight on, long after rational military forces would surrender. The variation reflects the collapse of central authority. Each unit makes its own decision about whether to fight or surrender based on local command and circumstance. Some German officers try to position their units to surrender to Western allies rather than Soviets, knowing Soviet treatment of prisoners will be harsh. This produces the strange phenomenon of German units fighting in the East while surrendering in the West. Germany is dissolving into chaos, and the chaos produces both pointless combat and mass surrenders simultaneously. The Battle of Berlin, conducted by Soviet forces while Americans halt at the Elbe, costs approximately 100,000 Soviet casualties in 2 weeks of urban combat. The casualty total validates Eisenhower's decision not to make Berlin an American objective. Urban warfare against fanatical defenders produces casualty rates far exceeding open country operations. Berlin has no strategic value. It is a symbol. Soviets pay in blood to capture the symbol. Americans let them, calculating that symbols are not worth soldiers' lives. The strategic decision becomes controversial in Cold War retrospect. Did letting Soviets take Berlin concede too much to Soviet political ambitions? Should Americans have raced for Berlin to limit Soviet territorial gains? These questions assume political considerations should override military calculations. Eisenhower makes military calculations. His decision is defensible on military grounds. The political consequences are beyond his remit to consider. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrenders unconditionally. The ceremony occurs in Berlin, in the Soviet-occupied Karlshorst district. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel signs the surrender document. Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov accepts. Western Allied representatives attend as witnesses. The war in Europe is over 337 days after D-Day, but the final accounting reveals costs that raise troubling questions. From January to May 1945, German civilian casualties from continued fighting and Allied bombing likely exceed 500,000. Allied casualties in the same period total over 200,000. German soldiers who die in the war's final months number in the hundreds of thousands. The casualties of the war's final phase approach the casualties of the entire year before. Was this necessary? Could negotiation have ended the war sooner, with fewer deaths? Or did unconditional surrender demand prosecution to the point of absolute defeat? These questions have no satisfying answers. The Western Front campaign from D-Day to surrender demonstrates what modern industrialized warfare costs. Allied forces in Western Europe suffer approximately 766,000 casualties from June 1944 to May 1945. German forces suffer perhaps 1 million casualties plus 4 million prisoners. French, Belgian, Dutch, and German civilians suffer at least 200,000 dead from combat, bombing, and Nazi reprisals. The material destruction of cities, infrastructure, and industrial capacity is incalculable. The human destruction in lives lost and lives permanently damaged defies quantification. All of this to defeat a regime that could have been stopped earlier if democratic nations had shown will to act when Germany was weak, rather than waiting until Germany was strong. The lesson is clear, but rarely learned. Preventing war is cheaper than fighting war. But preventing war requires political will to act against potential threats before they become actual catastrophes. That will is usually absent until catastrophe forces action. And then millions die who might have lived if action had come sooner. The soldiers who fought from Normandy to the Elbe deserve recognition beyond simplistic narratives of heroism and sacrifice. They were ordinary people placed in extraordinary circumstances. Many performed extraordinary acts. Many others simply tried to survive. All were shaped by experiences that left permanent scars. The men who crossed Omaha Beach, who fought in the Bocage, who endured Hurtgen Forest, who held Bastogne, who crossed the Rhine, carried the war's weight for the rest of their lives. Some spoke of their experiences, many did not. Yet all understood that they had participated in something that defined their generation and shaped the world that followed. They defeated Nazi Germany. The cost was immense. Whether the cost was necessary depends on whether one believes Nazi Germany could have been defeated less expensively. No one has provided a convincing alternative scenario. So, the campaign stands as it happened: brutal, costly, ultimately successful. The Western Front, 1944 to 1945. The campaign that broke Nazi Germany and demonstrated that evil, no matter how powerful, eventually falls to determined opposition. The question is, how many must die before the fall comes? And that question, tragically, can only be answered after the fact.